sessions and also some introductory sessions. There will be a break in the middle of about 10 minutes, and there will be plenty of scope for you to come up with your questions to members of the panels that will be on the program. Before we really get started, I'd like to inform you that the workshop will be recorded. If that is a concern to you, then you should be really aware of this, and maybe you should then consider not to follow the workshop. I also kindly invite you to keep your cameras and your mics off at all times. This meeting is much more popular than we anticipated at the very beginning, so we believe that we will be testing the limits of the technology that hosts this meeting, and you can be helpful by not trying to overload the system. So please keep your cameras off at all times, unless, of course, you're a speaker and you're coming in. There is a chat box, and you can use the chat box at any time, at any stage, to post your remarks and your questions. So we will be monitoring that, and these questions will then be taken up during the Q&A sessions following the various panels. Then I'd like to say something about the invitation that went out to you. And when we send out the invitation, involuntarily, we confirmed the invitation to all of you at the same time, in such a way that you could see each other's email addresses. Of course, this is not fully in line with the stringent privacy conditions that the Commission has imposed upon itself, and so I'd like to apologize for that. This was unintentional. And of course, we'll try and pay better attention on future occasions. And so, without any further delay, I'd like to move into the program itself. We start with the director of the Prosperity Directorate of DG Research and Innovation, and that is Peter Droel. He is really the person who has been behind all this, who has been promoting and helping to develop this concept of sustainable by design big time, and he will welcome you to the meeting. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Barend. I hope you can hear me. Welcome to this first workshop on criteria for sustainable, safe and sustainable by design. Welcome to DG Research and Innovation. In my very short introduction, I have a very simple, let me say, safe structure. I will briefly touch upon where we come from and how we got where we are now, so the present and the policy context, and then the next steps. So where do we come from? Part of our remit has been to invest in key enabling technologies which are key for our industrial bases. And advanced materials are a central element of these key enabling technologies, and they often use technologies at the nano scale, so nanotechnologies. And quite from the beginning, it was clear that we need to make sure that there is no accident, no risk which is uncalculated, and because we knew if we had a repetition of something like what happened with asbestos or with genetically modified organisms, it would be really counterproductive and put at risk our overall ambition to improve the industrial base, improve Europe's overall position, and make sure that there is no harm to safety, health, and the environment. So I think I can say we have not done everything wrong. We were quite successful with this safe by design materials, and we have reached out to international partners, have created networks, lots of good cooperations on safe by design, and that provided a very strong basis and still provides a very strong basis for our action. But then, and now I come to the present, came the European Green Deal. And the European Green Deal is much more than just a vision of the first climate neutral continent. It is much more than just the climate law with binding targets for 2020, 2030 and 2050, ambitious targets. We speak about the Fit for 55. It is, if you look at the Commission's work program, it ranges from energy system integration to renovation wave, from a hydrogen strategy to and a methane strategy to the circular economy action plan, from smart and sustainable mobility to the strategy farm to fork, from biodiversity to chemicals for sustainability. So this focus on sustainability under the Green Deal made it very obvious for us to connect safe by design with sustainable by design. Therefore, safe and sustainable by design. And it just made a lot of sense. And it made it to the chemical strategy. And I'm therefore very happy that we co-organized today's workshop with DG Environment and with my colleague and friend Kestutis Saudakas, who is the Director for Circular Economy and Green Growth in DG Environment. He's one of the very few fathers of this chemical strategy for sustainability. Very happy you're here. Hi, Kestutis. I'm very happy that we can do that together. Well, safe and sustainable by design requires a paradigm shift in how we estimate, track, communicate, and act on environmental and human health information at the process and the product level. And it is clear that we need for that an enabler with criteria. Criteria comes from the Greek criterion. It is standard or judge, allowing us to judge if something is safe and sustainable in all stages. So frankly, when we started with that, we underestimated the challenge. And I'm very grateful actually for the team around you, Barend. You, and I now will mention my colleagues. I don't do that often, but I will mention that them in alphabetical order. I'm very grateful to Alessia, to Alexandra, to Christina, to Soraya, to Javier, and to Thomas. You have already done an outstanding job here, and you participants, you will see that in a moment. And you can count on us all to continue with this wonderful team here. So to move to this, to master this paradigm shift, we need a joint effort of all actors in the society, in the economy. And this is why we are particularly happy that we are so numerous today, that you have joined us here this morning, because we can only pull this off together with you. And here my special thanks go to the speakers of this morning. Your commitment already before and in preparation for this workshop today and in our previous discussions has been an inspiration and an encouragement to me and to all of us here. So let me come to the next steps. Today is the first workshop, so it's an initial step, and it's about to involve you and get us all on the same page, and to clarify the process, how we will develop these criteria for safe and sustainable by design chemicals. which the Commission has announced in the chemical strategy for the next 2 years. So it's not a very short-term process, but we need that time, I'm sure. So based on this first exchange of views with you today, we plan to launch a dedicated survey. And I would ask you all to participate in that survey. It will shape our future action, course of action, and motivate others to participate. The broader the base, the better for our ambitions here. And then we will develop a methodology for criteria and come up with a criteria. The chemical sector, I see the chemical sector as a first demonstration of the safe and sustainable by design approach, and we can see how and whether and how we can take it from there to other sectors or areas of application. So that's it from my side. Thank you so much. Back to you, Barend.
Thank you, Peter, for this very inspiring introduction. And you already introduced Kęstutis Sadauskas to us. Kęstutis is the Director for Circular Economy and Green Growth at Director General for Environment of the European Commission. So I think the fact that Kęstutis is here with us this morning illustrates evidently that this Safe and Sustainable by Design agenda is much more than just an R&I story. It's really a very comprehensive story that has ramifications throughout a large part of the policy work that's being done at the European Commission. So Kęstutis, we are looking forward to your introduction now.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Barend, and Peter. Also, thanks a lot for the introduction and the offer to join me here. I'll come back to the specific things, Peter, that you mentioned, but let me maybe start by also reiterating what you said about the Green Deal, which defines a clear vision and objectives to put the European economy and society on a sustainable pathway. And in particular, the Green Deal defines three interlinked policy goals, which will drive the societal transition: climate neutrality, circular economy, and zero pollution / toxic-free ambition. The concept of safe and sustainable by design lies really at the very heart of this multiple transition. I would say it's really the DNA of this transition. It aims to ensure that chemicals, materials, and products are designed, produced, and used in a way that does not harm people and does not harm environment. And the vision for this concept is enshrined now in two key strategic documents adopted by the Commission last year. One is Circular Economy Action Plan, adopted March, so now 1 year ago. It promotes the safety and sustainability of products along their entire life cycle, and it targets their design, production processes. It fosters sustainable consumption. It aims to keep the resources in the economy for as long as possible. It also announces initiatives in particular to improve the durability and reusability of products, address the presence of hazardous chemicals, and increase their resource efficiency. The chemical strategy for sustainability adopted in October provides a further push in this direction as it aims to catalyze the shift towards chemicals, materials, and products that are inherently safe and sustainable from the production to end of life. In fact, there are other headline initiatives that are very relevant here. For example, the Farm to Fork strategy looks at how we use better chemicals and how we use chemicals better for food production. The Action Plan for Zero Pollution Ambition, which will come in 2 months, will also look at the innovative ways to reduce pollution in water, air, and soil, and that will require also materials which are safe and sustainable by design. In the chemical strategy for sustainability, we announced a number of measures and supporting tools to move forward. In fact, when we were preparing the strategy, the chemical strategy, we felt that something fundamental has to run as a threat to this strategy, and we were thinking hard what it could be, basically how to really go to the very start of how things really begin and how they become either useful or problematic, sometimes both at the same time. And then Peter Droll and his colleagues came to us and they said, well, how about looking at the concept of sustainable by design? And we said, bingo, that's exactly what we need. That's precisely the word. And then we also, I think in the joint discussions, had the word safe and sustainable to make sure that both really go together. And that's really how it really came about. And very important that this concept, this idea really came also from the colleagues who work on innovation. So clearly this concept has a strong innovation drive. As a result, we announced that the Commission will develop by 2022 criteria of safe and sustainable by design. And Peter has just said what criteria in Greek really mean, and they mean really a lot. In the development of this criteria, the three interlinked goals defined in green have to be fully met. One, we need to move towards toxic-free environment and therefore avoid as much as possible substances which pose a concern for human health and environment. And those are the chemicals that have a chronic effect, which means that they have a lasting effect, an effect that will last for life. For example, carcinogens, endocrine disruptors, or persistent substances. Second, we need to become fully circular in the way we use our natural resources and make sure that the materials and products we produce and use are more durable, they are more reusable, so that waste is prevented as much as possible. And third, we need to ensure that our production processes are greener, that they contribute in particular to the achievement of climate neutrality and to zero pollution emission. So as you see, we need a holistic and life cycle perspective to chemicals, products, and materials, and this perspective needs to be at the very foundation of the safe and sustainable by design concept. This concept is and will increasingly drive our policies. On the one hand, it will steer an important part of the EU's research and innovation agenda. Authorities and industry really need to know where to direct the investment and to be sure that that investment is safe and is the right one to do. The criteria will help defining which innovations should take place, and on the contrary, which investment should be deprioritized. On the other hand, regulatory processes need clear definitions and criteria on what is safe and sustainable. Let me mention only three very relevant upcoming legal initiatives. First of all, the ongoing work on sustainable finance aims to define what investments can be considered sustainable in line with EU legislation. Second, we will propose by the end of the year a sustainable product initiative, and that will be legislative initiative to regulate the overall sustainability of products. And thirdly, next year, we will also propose targeted revision of REACH regulation. And within that revision, we will also assess how best to introduce information requirements on the overall environmental footprint of chemicals. Let me finish by highlighting the role of innovation and frontrunners for successful transition to safe and sustainable chemicals and materials. We need innovation to do things differently. Europe has scientific and technical capacity to lead this crucial transition, but frontrunners still encounter major economic and technical barriers. In fact, just a couple of days ago, Commission's President von der Leyen, in the launch of the Innovation Council, said that we have a paradox, that we make science with money, and we make very good science with that money, but we are not best in making money with the science. So the transition therefore needs strong policy and financial support, and requires a concerted effort from all authorities, businesses, investors, researchers, and civil society. So I'm really delighted to see the important participation to today's workshop from all over Europe on all types of stakeholders. For me, this is really a sign of a concerted effort, which is already really on a good track. And I'm absolutely confident that what is starting today will have a major and profound impact for many years to come on EU policies and on EU economy and environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Kestutis, and we are delighted to have you in the workshop as well. So that's a win-win situation. So, ladies and gentlemen, after these very nice introductory welcome words by board directors, we now enter the actual program. We will start by setting the scene, and that will be done by two of my very good colleagues, Alexandra Maliska and Javier Sanfelix, who will do a twin act, basically explaining to you where we're coming from, what has been achieved so far, and that will hopefully then help set the scene and be an inspiration for the discussion that will follow. So, Alexandra and Javier, over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me clearly. It's first of all, good morning, and it's a great pleasure to present the steps for criteria definition, concept and planning, to share with you our way of thinking and the work that we've been doing for quite some time. To start with, I would like to just very briefly stress that today's meeting is really about the process towards criteria definition. It's not about the criteria themselves. As Peter mentioned, we are aware how complex and challenging this task is, and on the other hand, how impactful the consequences of our work might be. So this is why we decided to first share our vision, our approach, our pathway towards criteria definition, and also to very precisely inform you when and how your contributions could be made and will be awaited. So I can imagine that many of you are sitting now and thinking, okay, I'm now one of over 500 people with my microphone off. So how can I really contribute? But please bear with me and my colleague Javier for the next 20 minutes. And I hope we will clarify the process for you and you will be very much aware when and how you can contribute. But before going into details, I would like to start with providing you a bigger picture. I know sometimes when we are going directly into details and discussing technical issues, we forget where do we want to go. And this is something that we really want to stress. Our vision is a sustainable, fair and prosperous future for people and planet based on European values. The Commission is committed to tackle climate change, to help to achieve sustainable development goals, and of course to boost the Union's competitiveness and growth. Can I ask for another slide? After the excellent introduction that was made by Peter and Kestutis, I'm sure it is more than clear why this workshop is so important for us. But what I would like to stress that those policy goals were very much translated into very specific and concrete actions. And for that, chemical strategy for sustainability is the first deliverable under the zero pollution ambition. And among very generally here pointed out actions that are foreseen in the chemical strategy for sustainability, today we will focus on enabling use and enable development and of safe and sustainable by design chemicals. Can I please have another slide? Peter very briefly mentioned where we are coming from. And I also would like to follow a bit to providing you a bit of context before going directly to the process of planning and deciding on how the criteria will be looking like. So the DG RTD, of course, where we are coming from, is our work that was done for over a decade. And I think that among many of you being present at this meeting, by design rings a bell. Peter already mentioned that we in DGRTD started with thinking of safe by design. And indeed, we did invested and initiate the process of creating a framework for safe by design with nanomaterials and nano-enabled products when we started to support many projects to develop the framework itself. But of course, with the time and different policy targets, we decided to be more ambitious and go beyond nanomaterials in a way to be able to address and encompass sustainability targets. And of course, many of you might say, okay, safety is already quite a challenging to be fulfilled. And indeed, that's the case. But to some extent, it can be demonstrated by fulfilling regulatory requirements. Sustainability, on the other hand, is a far wider and less well-defined concept. And some of you might remember the slide that me or my colleagues were presented several times during different occasions that really brings us to our understanding of sustainable by design, where we initially thought, and this is still, I think, our understanding, that safety is an integral part of sustainability. But here today, what we would really like to discuss and communicate with you is the concept, the approach to design and develop and use of substances, materials and products that on one hand provide a function or service, but on the other hand make sure that we are reducing the harmful impacts to health and our environment. This, of course, requires a holistic approach in which high protection of human health and the environment comes hand in hand with industrial relevance, societal empowerment, and regulatory preparedness. And all of that are translated into well-defined criteria for safe and sustainable products and services. And this is something that we are really want and to discuss today. Thus, as mentioned before, transition towards safe and sustainable by design chemicals, materials, and products, in our opinion, is the first demonstration of such an approach. Can I please ask the second slide? To make the concept working in the real world, we really need to make sure that chemicals, materials, and products are perceived as attractive, both by consumers and industry. And we think that by incorporating safe and sustainable by design early on at the design stage, we can reduce the overall time required for research and development. We can bring the products to the market faster. We can support more effective innovation and make sure that materials, substances, and products designed today are suitable for future consumer needs and the meeting regulatory requirements that will be in line with the policy goals that you have already heard about today. This also implies additional costs and burdens. We are aware of that. This needs to be mapped and addressed, and we really hope that this workshop will be one of the points when we can hear from diversity of stakeholders and representatives of different countries, different institutions, different initiatives, what issues need to be tackled. Can I please have the next slide? And going into criteria development and definition, how did we go and how do we plan about to arrive towards safe and sustainable by design criteria? Actually, we started with trying to answer very basic questions. So what process should we follow? Which dimension of safety and sustainability to include? How to measure? Which kind of indicators and tools should be used? Are they already available? Which are the priority sectors to address first? We will not be able to tackle everything from the start, so we need to focus on the sectors and applications with the biggest potential for the improvement. And last but not least, how to create a community. As Peter very rightly mentioned in his opening remarks, this is about the mind shift on how we trace, communicate, and act on the information that we get. And I think it's extremely important to create a community across different disciplines and knowledge bases to do it efficiently. And this kind of questions trigger our way of thinking and the process that we are going to follow. Can I please have the next slide? So to start our process, we kick off with trying to answer the first question: which process to follow? And we decided not to reinvent wheel totally. This is why we started with mapping of existing initiatives and research developments in the EU and worldwide. And for this part, my colleague Javier will give you a kind of idea and a first impression of the outcomes of our internal study that we have conducted. The whole study, this is a starting point from which we would like to get this discussion further. But this is exactly when we need your inputs, and we are hoping to get the feedback from your side. So we plan to publish this study soon after the workshop in March or April. And immediately in parallel process, we're going to initiate a stakeholder survey in which we're going to ask you to address and to answer very specific and technical questions that will allow us to answer and to identify the safety and sustainability dimension to be covered under Safe and Sustainable by Design. We'll also help to get your advice and inputs regarding the priority sectors or application of chemicals with a higher potential for improvement. This will be all validated in a dedicated technical stakeholder workshop that we plan to organize around autumn. This will be, of course, dedicated and smaller event when we will be very much targeting to invite experts, technical experts, to provide their vision, to challenge our way of thinking and the first deliverables and outcomes of the framework for the criteria development. Can I please ask for the next slide? In parallel, of course, as mentioned before, we are dedicated to establish a wide network of experts and stakeholders to really make this initiative be across the different knowledge fields and disciplines. And no wonder, as DG RTD, we have extreme and very powerful mechanism to support creating and establishing such an inclusive community. And this is why I would like to raise your attention regarding the upcoming Horizon Europe first work package, first work program that will be announced very soon, in which we have dedicated calls that will be very much focusing on supporting and creating such a community that all of you can contribute and can apply to. We really want to have a community that will support and contribute to developing and implementing criteria and making safe and sustainable by design as a guiding principle. We would like to establish a permanent structure for long-term operation, and we would like to have your inputs into broadly supported and periodically updated roadmaps. We'll also have a first approach to test the safe and sustainable by design approach and fill in existing gaps with two priority areas that will focus on polymeric materials and metal coatings. Can I please have the next slide? And of course, as much as mentioned before, this is a very long and very ambitious vision that we would like to apply beyond the only and exclusively the chemical sector, and hope to make the safe and sustainable by design a kind of guiding principle across different sectors. We have things to deliver, and we need to deliver them soon. And that this will be the first opportunity for us to test and demonstrate the applicability of the concept that we are so much dedicated to. So as of beginning of next year, we will be very much focusing on developing specific criteria. And this will be done making use of the development of the framework that I've already explained to you, and with the help of the support network that we are aiming to establish. Of course, more specific and dedicated actions and activities in 2022 will be communicated to you. And I really do hope that all of you that will be interested to stay informed and involved after this first initial workshop from our side will be following our activities, or we will continue communicating with you. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention for the first part of my presentation, and I would like to invite my colleague Javier to complement.
Thank you, Alexandra. So I will briefly introduce you the mapping study that has been mentioned before that we did at in DG RTD. We plan to have it available in the coming weeks, and as soon as it is public, we will share it with you all. The objective of this study was to start collecting input for the development of the safe and sustainable by design methodology and the criteria. And for that, what we did is to identify existing policies and initiatives that are already sustainability criteria implementation, and other studies that have methods that could be useful for the purpose of our criteria. And we also looked and analyzed the progress done in different research and innovation actions funded by the GRTD. The scope of our safe and sustainable by design criteria, as it has been already introduced, is chemicals, materials, and products. And here, for chemicals and materials, we align with the definitions of REACH for substances and mixtures. Still in the previous slide, please. And when we talk about products, we refer to a chemical product or a material product, meaning that chemicals and materials that are intended for consumers or likely to be used by consumers. So, for example, a chemical product could be a paint, and a material product could be an impregnated wood. Next slide, please. So, to start, next slide. Okay, thanks. To start this mapping study, we first looked at the initiatives that are already implementing criteria. Okay, and we divided in 3 levels: the European Commission initiatives, European initiatives, and non-European initiatives that are worldwide. The objective is to collect insights on the frameworks used to develop criteria. And for all of these initiatives that you see here, we looked at the scope of application, the life cycle stages covered, the process for the criteria definition, methodologies used for this criteria definition, and the verification process. We know that, still in the previous slide, yeah, thanks. We know that that the list is not exhaustive, but you might know that, for example, in terms of eco-labels, it's a huge number of initiatives available. So we decided to take a sample that could help us to get an initial idea of an overview picture. For the Commission initiatives, you see here in the list that we looked at the already existing ones for quite some time and very successful, like eco-design, energy label, the EU eco-label, and green public procurement criteria. But we also looked at the new ones that have been are under development now in the different actions and strategies that have been presented, like the Sustainable Products Initiative, Sustainable Batteries, or Sustainable Finance. So, and with the Commission initiatives, the ambition level of the criteria varies depending on the nature of the policy tool. So there are mandatory criteria and others voluntary. What we understood is that there is no single policy that is able of addressing all product and sector-specific challenges, and that a combination of voluntary and mandatory tools is needed to address this aspect. Next slide, please. So we also, as I said, we also looked at relevant studies and methodologies that are out there that can help. They are not defining criteria or implementing criteria, but they could be very useful for the purpose of safe and sustainable by design. And one of them, for example, is the product environmental footprint, which is a methodology for the Commission to compare environmental impacts of products and services. We have identified several OECD reports that are very relevant for our work in terms of safety analysis and aspects, and we will have representatives from OECD being part of this workshop today. Also, the International Sustainable Chemistry Collaborative Center, which defines 10 key characteristics for sustainable chemistry that you see here on the list, and we will count also with a representative of this center today in the workshop. Next. The Framework Manual on Green and Sustainable Chemistry from the United Nations. Next, the Guide on Sustainable Chemicals from the German Environmental Agency, which is very interesting because they already define criteria at 2 different levels for chemicals. One is a substance-specific criteria, and the other is a use-specific criteria. And the Sustainable Chemistry R&D Act from the United States that will create a roadmap for sustainable chemistry within the next 2 years. Next slide, please. So we looked at different initiatives that have criteria under implementation already, and we took a sample of different products that they have criteria in order to understand how materials and chemicals are addressed and identify gaps to orientate the sustainable, safe and sustainable by design criteria development. So we took 40 different products and about 460 criteria were analyzed. And what you see here is our first analysis of these results. And we identified that normally for the substances, the hazard of the substances is the main driver for defining criteria in the tools review. And this is normally addressed by excluding substances or limiting their presence. This is normally linked to the candidate list of substances of very high concern of breach. Another approach is by providing information in the label for consumers or assuring that the recyclability of the product will not be hampered. And another very interesting one is by explicitly allowing substances with a good to use list with safer alternatives. From the sample that we took, we identified that very few criteria address other sustainability aspects of chemicals and materials, and that it only happens for products like furniture, textile, and paper, where sustainable sourcing criteria is sometimes requested for the raw materials used to produce these products. Next slide, please. As we mentioned, another part of the study was to analyze the progress done in Safe by Design for nanomaterials in the different research and innovation actions that have been funded. As Alexandra said, we have in our DG a long history in investing in research for nanomaterials, and now we are going to expand and include sustainability aspects as well, and expand the scope not only to nanomaterials but chemicals, materials, and products. So there is a series of activities in Europe related to safety aspects of nanomaterials that you see here listed on the screen, and that we have a number of Horizon 2020 projects that are contributing to the different initiatives and regulations and standards. Here you only see a short list of projects, but right now we have around 25 ongoing projects, plus all the ones that already finished in the past years. So there is a lot of know-how and knowledge gathered that can be relevant for the development of safe and sustainable by design. Next slide, please. So we looked at the different projects and the outcomes that they produce. And here we're just going to show a couple of examples. And for example, they are already analyzing how to take into account safety principles from early stages of the innovation process of nanomaterials. And in this case, for example, they were starting to consider also how to include environmental aspects or other sustainability aspects. So they identify also that these safety aspects and principles is better if you start applying them and taking into account from early stages of the innovation process, because the later you start thinking of this, it will require more substantial and more expensive modifications for the material or the chemical that you are producing. And next slide, please. And here it's another example of how in one of these projects, which we will have again OECD presented later on in the workshop, how to take into account different safety aspects at the different stages of the material. And now, after analyzing everything that we have compiled, we drafted a possible structure for safe and sustainable by design criteria. Please keep in mind that this is a very first draft that we have identified, and that the purpose now with this survey is that we will ask your views on if you think it is well structured or we should look for another way of doing, if we are missing some criteria that are relevant as well. So this study that we did is the very first step for us to start framing the questions that we want to ask you in the survey, and then consult you to gather input and complement what we have identified so far, because I'm sure there are so many initiatives up there that still we can identify very relevant ones for the contribution. So just to explain briefly here that we divided the three life cycle stages, the main ones: production, use stage, and end of life. And we put 3 columns for 3 main criteria areas: environment, safety, and social. And then according to the life cycle states, we distributed them. But yeah, this is to be consulted and just for the start discussions. That's it. Thank you very much for your time. And now I think we have a bit time for questions if you need some clarifications on the progress and the next steps that have been presented.
Thank you so much, Alexandra and Javier. I think very comprehensive, and ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, a very substantial deal of groundwork already has been accomplished so far. So now is your opportunity to come in and ask questions to Javier and Alexandra. We'll take a few minutes for that. The way to do this is by listing your questions in the chat box, which we are monitoring, and evidently this is also applying to the rest of the agenda. So then in a few minutes we'll also start the panels. Then at any stage you can ask your questions, which we will then take on board for the discussion part of these panels. But now first questions for Alexandra and Javier. Okay, so I have a question here and I'll read it to you. Do I understand correctly that the safe and sustainable by design concept will not focus on basic industrial chemicals such as sulfuric acid and propylene, but on chemical products that are used by consumers such as paints, detergents, and so on?
No. We will cover all. We just have the 3 levels, so we will cover also chemicals as such, but this is still to be defined. We are going in during this year, we're going to identify which are the chemicals that have the highest priority and bigger room for improvement. But yeah, the idea is all type of chemicals are covered by the methodology.
Okay. I've seen a question, Javier, that you in the mapping study, you're not talking about the research and development stage. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, we don't talk about the research and development stage. We cover what has been done in research and development for the safety aspects of nanomaterials, because this is where we had more knowledge now. And I think we are addressing this aspect, but of course, probably there is more out there to be considered, and I would invite this person to contribute to our survey and provide more input for this. But I think we are covering. Probably it has not been well expressed.
Okay,
we want to take this into account, definitely.
Then I have a question maybe for Alexandra, and this deals with our understanding of sustainability. So the question reads, one pillar of sustainability is the economic aspect, but here it seems not considered. Can you explain this choice?
First of all, we did the mapping study was an overview, looking what is already existing. And what Javier showed is a kind of first example of the criteria that we do have in mind. But as mentioned and stressed is in my presentation, we are aware that we are talking here about holistic approach, and also the economic and societal aspects are very relevant and important. On the other hand, we need to make those criteria implementable. So this is a big challenge for us, how to address this aspect to still arrive with something that could be implementable for industry by 2022. As mentioned, this is the first deliverable. So it's absolutely not dismissing this very challenging aspect. This will be taken into consideration. And this is why we are organizing this survey to ask you what dimensions should be included. And then the dimension like economic or societal aspects could be also mentioned by you. So this is not a fixed process, and definitely it's not that we would like to dismiss and ignore the broader context in which we are operating.
Okay, thank you, Alexandra. Now, I need to keep an eye on the clock, so I'm aware that there's plenty of comments and questions in the chat, which we are not ignoring. As I said, we are monitoring those, and we'll see if we can bring your questions back maybe later in the debate. Maybe to conclude, Javier, could you remind us once more when and under what format this survey will be made available?
So we will create an EU survey that will be distributed to the participants of this workshop, probably by the end of April. Well, this is the timing that we have in mind, and there will be 1 month in order to contribute to these questions that then we will compile and digest and use it as an input to start developing our methodology for the criteria development. So end of April, publication of the survey, and then 1 month, 4 weeks for answering and completing the survey.
Thank you very much indeed. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we move to the next step in our agenda. Thanks once more to Javier and Alexandra. So we now start around. What we try and do is try and see and understand the perspective of the industry, of NGOs, of the academic community. And they will all give their perspective. We'll have in this first round 4 speakers, and I will introduce them once they come on the stage. Before we start, I'd like to remind all the speakers that our time is precious, so you have been allotted something like 6 minutes for your introductory remarks. Once you see my face popping up again, it basically means your time is up. So, but I'm sure you will be very disciplined in this. I remind participants, please continue making your remarks, asking your questions through the chat function. So the first speaker which we have is Anne Dirks, who is with CEFIC, and she is the Director of Sustainability at CEFIC. I don't think neither Anne or CEFIC need any further introduction, so Anne, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning to you all. I hope you can all hear me. Yes, and we had a set of slides prepared, so it would be nice if the first slide, yes, it's there. Thank you very much. So on behalf of the European chemical industry, I want really to thank the European Commission here to invite CEFIC to present our views on the Safe and Sustainable by Design in this first stakeholder workshop. We welcome very much this initiative taken by the European Commission to develop EU safe and sustainable by criteria for the chemicals, because we believe that defining what safe and sustainability means, safe and sustainable by design means in the longer term will enhance indeed investor confidence in Europe and de-risk investment in alternatives. And that is needed to turn the SSBD in a concept that is not only making that it's making business sense, but that also drives real tangible investment. And so we're very happy to contribute to this process that you outlined there a moment ago. Now, the next slide, please. Here we have on a definition, it's work in progress, I would say. So this is how we see safe and sustainable by design at the chemical industry. So we see it very much as a process to bring products and technologies to the market that are safe, bring environmental, economic, and social value through their applications, and are indeed accelerating the transition towards a circular economy and climate neutral society. Next. So a few principles we want to highlight here immediately. So we take an application value chain approach. We say that safe and sustainable by design really builds on scientific knowledge. It aims to boost innovation towards chemicals that are safe for humans and environment, that offer an improved environmental footprint, so no reduction, and deliver the expected performance and value to stakeholders throughout the value chain. The safe and sustainable by design, it has already been said, needs to take a holistic approach, and it has to be based on life cycle thinking. And the challenge will be that it needs to strike a balance between improving the SHE profile and no reduction there, reducing life cycle impacts, and maximizing function and performance requirements. That's our starting definition. Now let's have a look at the next slide, because to make this work, you obviously need to start thinking about a set of criteria and an assessment framework. And if you can click once more, thank you. Indeed. So we have developed a first proposal, and this builds on the expertise our industry has with assessing the sustainability of their product portfolio. So not starting from a blank page here. That approach has been really promoted by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and a guidance is out there, and I'm happy to send you the links. Portfolio sustainable assessment are increasingly used by chemical companies, and not only in our sector, but beyond the sector of the chemical industry, to steer the overall product portfolio towards ever improved sustainability outcomes. As mentioned, it takes a product application look, and we are looking into what we call in that methodology different signal categories. So that could be indeed, it starts with chemical hazard and exposure across the life cycle, but it also looks into other signal categories such as sustainable ambitions in the value chain, the contributions to the SDGs, and others. Taking that approach results in categorization of the portfolio, and that indeed is then guiding companies to take decisions on innovating for alternatives as one of those decisions. Now, this wheel that you have here is like very big, so it is really inspired on all the examples we saw as well as other guidances. So we also went through a broad mapping exercise, but this wheel is of course not practical to move on. We have to make it practical. And so we are then looking how we can tailor this, looking into different application, looking into different product types of uses, because not all criteria are relevant for all products and all uses. A detergent clearly is not the same as a battery. Now the next slide shows the process that we are now actually going through. So we are in the process of identifying what we call key sustainability dimensions. You have them there in the outer circle. So it needs to be safe. That is the first building block. Sustainability dimension also looks into societal value, in performance, there's an economic aspect, and there's an environmental footprinting aspect. And here we also see reference again to the life cycle, to the MCDA, so the balancing, to the application and science-based and risk assessment principle, which are very important, and there are more. Now we want to underline here that we use indeed a circle to present this process of safe and sustainable by design. And that is because in our view, all these aspects are interlinked and there is no real starting point. They come all together and they work all together. Now to move forward as well, what we're doing now is we are assigning this big wheel of a wealth of possible criteria. So we are assigning the criteria of that wheel towards these 5 dimensions we just discussed. Now, all legal requirements would fall evidently under what we would call these are minimum criteria. They have to be met, but they can be different for different product application combinations. But if we want, and that's what I like very much about the introduction, if we want, and we want to achieve the Green Deal objectives and the Sustainable Development Goals, we need also to think about, at the design phase, about circularity, about climate neutrality. So the chemical products or the substances, the materials, the processes, because we're also looking into processes under this heading, the technologies, well, they should contribute to these objectives and they should definitely not negatively impact those. That's just to name a few, circularity and climate neutrality. But we can also think that for some companies, the food perspective is important, and that then ties in with the Sustainable Development Goals again. So this is our ongoing work, and we are really thrilled to share this with you. And we look forward to engage with the European Commission and with the other stakeholders here in this first workshop to define a common assessment framework that we believe is essential to the success of the chemical strategy for sustainability and the other ambitions, and that can and will accelerate innovation, not only in our sector, in the chemical sector, but as well in the value chains we serve. we see different routes of actions that we'll be happy to discuss with you to arrive there, but maybe we can reserve that to the Q&A section, being in mind that the time is short here. So I would like to leave it at this point in time now, and I'm happy to hear your reactions and questions in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anne. Very nice to see that industry is fully on board. That is absolutely essential. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we'll first do is we'll go first through the other introductions, and then we'll start a debate. And I'm very happy to see the very lively and intense chat exchanges. So, the next speaker is Dorota Bartkowiak. She holds the position of research coordinator at the International Sustainable Chemistry Collaborative Center hosted by Leuphana University in Lüneburg in Germany. And she will be speaking without any slides, I understand. So, Dorota, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with you today. And I think that Leuphana University and the ISC preview on the criteria are very in line with the European Commission. In my short speech, I would like to highlight a few aspects that are considered as the most important. So the safe and sustainable criteria should go beyond green chemistry, which is focused on chemicals production and properties, and not sufficient as sustainability is much broader concept as greenness. Therefore, SSBD cannot refer only to chemicals, processes, materials, and products, but also their application and need broader system thinking. Else, SSBD could be only sustainability washing or just giving wrong guidance, and should be, in this case, renamed as green by design. The criteria should, in addition, cover the environmental, social, and economic dimensions of sustainability, and safety should be included in all of them. That means chemicals, materials, and products that are safe for humans and environment and beneficial for all dimensions of sustainability. However, we need to be aware that more sustainable technologies might be more expensive in the short run, but in the long term, they will bring not only environmental and social benefits, but also economic benefits. Circularity and sound resources use play an important role for the chemicals, materials, and products that are not released to the environment. The products that are or might be released to the environment in their primary form or as metabolites, for example, pharmaceuticals, fertilizers, biocides, must be designed for complete environmental degradation. This is crucial to avoid adverse impact on human health and environment directly and indirectly on economics, as medical treatment and cleanup costs are usually very high and have to be considered. Here, the word mineralization, especially environmental mineralization, is the key, as degradation or biodegradation products might also be hazardous. And I think we all know the example of biodegradable plastics degrading to microplastic, and this is something what we don't want. Last but not least, we don't really know what is green or sustainable, and we can only know by comparison what is greener or more sustainable. And this should be included too when the concept is communicated and applied. In our opinion, criteria should be implemented in the form of legislation and regulations. Guidance and recommendations are not strong enough and may hinder the successful implementation, as the forerunners who follow it might be outcompeted by the ones who do not. Successful implementation and law enforcement, as it has been already said, requires precise assessment tools and metric systems for all types of chemicals, materials, and products, and should be covered cycle, including resources and extraction, more sustainable use, and end-of-life issues. For that, the concept of SSBD should be further developed. The discussion and developments within the European taxonomy system might deliver the metrics needed. One could also learn from quality assurance schemes or eco-management and audit schemes. Legislation will be moreover a driver for innovation. However, incentives such as preferred fast-track market authorization, tax relief, or prolonged patent lifetime are needed. It is also worth to mention that alternative business models have a huge potential to support SSBD implementation. The number of relevant chemicals, materials, and products to start defining SSBD criteria is huge, and we were able to identify 3 priority groups. The first group are chemicals, materials, and products that cannot be kept in the closed circle and are released to the environment in high quantities and have high adverse impact, such as pharmaceuticals, fertilizers, pesticides, biocides, detergents, etc. The second group are complex products that, and materials such as plastics and electronics, among others, and such products cannot be reused, recycled, or properly separated due to their high complexity and integration and numerous additives, and therefore are usually incinerated or landfill. Last but not least, are materials critical for sustainable development and low carbon technologies, such as, for example, metals, renewable energy and carbon neutral LNG production, low carbon industrial processes, for example, power-to-X, green catalytic reactions, digital technologies, communication, electromobility, among others, require high amount of metals that are non-renewable resources of high demand and limited resources. One has to be aware that substitution of critical metals is not truly sustainable. Is not really sustainable solution, as it only postpones the problem to other resources or to other times. Therefore, special attention should be paid to materials and product design for circularity, including reduced complexity. This includes also to understand that many chemicals, including many elements, including metals, are endangered species and are dissipated by not appropriate use, resulting in dissipative, irreversible uses. And such materials cannot be synthesized. If I still have a minute, I would like to mention how work of Leuphana University and ISC3 is linked to European Commission concept. So we are developing the concept of sustainable chemistry, which covers safe and sustainable design and use of chemicals, products, and materials. We conduct a dialogue with different stakeholders from all over the world, and we are contributing to bringing sustainable chemistry into chemistry education. Furthermore, we have developed chemicals and pharmaceuticals which are environmentally mineralizing after introduction into the environment and end of life. An example, chemicals, pharmaceuticals which cannot be circulated. And we are also working on understanding criteria for chemical products and materials to fit into circular economy for both circulation and recycling. To enhance the synergies and avoid work duplications, knowledge exchange and experience exchange, as well as transparency regarding activities of both parties is needed. And we are helpful and we are glad to contribute. And that's all. Thank you very much. I think I'm on time. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Dorota. This very inspiring, very comprehensive, a lot of food for thought. So we are now moving to Frida Höök, who is with ChemSec, which is the International Chemical Secretariat, a Swedish NGO that advocates for the change to safer chemicals. Frida has been with ChemSec since 2009 and is responsible for the ChemSec strategic policy work, as well as to coordinate all ChemSec projects. Also, Frida will be speaking without any slides. Frida, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, and thank you for having me at this important session. So the chemical strategy for sustainability is an opportunity. And overall, this strategy has a very clear message from EU policymakers. Hazardous chemicals are not the future. Safe and sustainable alternatives are. So therefore, the definition of safe and sustainable by design is very important to get right. So we start with safe. Safe should be what any consumer would regard as safe. Safe is non-toxic. A safe chemical means no substance of concern. Definition of safe needs to be built on the intrinsic properties of the chemical, the hazard approach, or the generic risk management approach. The definition should not include any risk calculations. Because in a circular economy, where all products should be reused and recycled and materials will come back into new, different products, exposure risk can never be predicted and calculated, and all substance of concern will be an unacceptable risk. A safe material or product means it does not include any substance of concern. The definition of safe can never be diminished. This means that regardless if a product will be used to reduce CO2 emissions, to save water or clean air, inclusion of substance of concern disqualifies it as safe. So this approach is the same as in the upcoming taxonomy regulation, where the basic idea is that one area should not affect the other areas in a negative way. So leaving safe and moving towards sustainability, the definition needs to be slightly different if we talk about chemicals or if we talk about materials and products. So when it comes to chemicals, we propose to focus on energy and circularity. The chemical industry is the second most energy demanding industry in the EU, and therefore energy is an important aspect to consider. Circularity for chemical is to a large extent solved by using safe and non-hazardous chemicals, since these can be circulated without contamination of the recycling material. And when it comes to materials and products, more parameters need to be included in the definition of sustainability. Circularity and energy consumption being both very important criteria, as well as the resource issue and durability. Products are often very difficult to recycle efficiently. To be able to recycle products into new materials, product designers need to consider how the product can be recycled at the end of its life. This needs to be done in close cooperation with the recycling industry, since success also depends on if they can sort and separate the products efficiently. Functionality is not something we think is needed in a definition. The market will self-regulate. If a product does not work, it will not sell. And moreover, we don't believe that a full life cycle assessment is needed, because they are very complex and they can be designed in different ways and make it possible to trade different parameters against each other, meaning if something does good in one end, it's okay to use something more bad at the other end. So we propose to have a more straightforward and easily duplicated criteria, and we are very concerned about sort of any trading of parameters. So how should these criteria be implemented when we have them? So as a first step, we propose the criteria to be able to certify against them like an official certification, since this would give incentives to industry to certify their own safe and sustainable products. This would give market opportunities and drive the industry towards safe and sustainable, as well as give clear incentives for innovation. A list of safe and sustainable chemicals, materials, and products would be very useful to transform the industry to a non-toxic and sustainable industry, like a white list. This is actually what a large part of the producing industry is asking for. Many of the producing companies have ambitious goals when it comes to be circular, use safe, meaning non-hazardous chemicals, and provide safe and sustainable products to their consumers. Clear criteria and the certification of safe and sustainable chemical products and materials will help them to speed up their work. Many companies we talk to are very engaged in sustainability, and they need for these definition we talk about here today to be something to lean on, something that truly catches the essence of sustainability and excludes any kind of greenwashing. Yesterday, H&M Group launched a paper on their own definition of safe and sustainable by design. In this paper, they emphasize the importance of only using a hazard-based approach on intrinsic properties when evaluating chemicals. They also emphasize the need for a full chemical transparency in the supply chain, as well as in the waste and recycling phase. So this is needed to be able to provide safe materials and know what chemicals are included in materials, products, and recycling material. And the market for recycled material has really the potential to grow. If hazardous chemicals were not present in the input material, the waste. Chemsec released a report on this issue a few weeks ago, showing that only the value of the EU market for plastic packaging would increase by 7.7 billion if the recycling rate for plastic packaging was increased by 30%. And transparency is key, not only for the recycling process, but also when it comes to the value of the recycling material. So progressive companies with stringent chemical management are not willing to buy recycled content without knowing what chemicals they contain. So, to summarize, Chemicals of concern, chemicals with intrinsic hazard properties, can never be considered safe and are thus not sustainable. Materials or products containing chemicals of concern can never be considered safe and not sustainable. Circularity is key. By designing products with recycling and circularity in mind, we will both save resources, energy, as well as money. Criteria leading to an official certification of safe and sustainable chemicals, materials, and products would give industry incentives to develop safe and sustainable products. And this would fulfill the aims of the chemical strategy for sustainability and transform the industry towards safe and sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Frida. Very clear position and a bit different from the industry, for instance, so I'm sure that will lead to a very interesting discussion. Excellent. And with that, we are already moving to the fourth and last member of the panel here, and that is Dennis Arijanis, who is the director of the Research Center on the Exposome and Health at the Center for Interdisciplinary Research and Innovation of Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. He's a member of the Expert Committee on Air Pollution of the Greek Ministry of Health, and advisor to the WHO European Center for Environment and Health. Dennis, the floor is yours. I remind participants that your questions in the chat are still very, very welcome.
Thank you very much, Barend. And I'd like to thank the organizers, and in particular Alexandra and Javier, for the very kind invitation. I'm actually representing also the PART initiative. This is one of the new partnerships that are being designed right now, bringing together work of the European Commission, but also all the member states to support the and promote actually enhanced risk assessment of chemicals. So this is very relevant to what we're discussing today. If you can go to the next slide. So I just try to focus on the key questions that more or less all of us in the panel try to address, and that is, what are the key dimensions of safety and sustainability that should not be missed in the SSBD criteria definition? I try to decompose this in terms of looking at the safe by design first and then sustainable by design. Clearly, in our view, the cornerstone of safe by design should be the coordinated effort to safeguard human health, followed by environmental hazards, but ensuring at the same time that this is not against major sustainability goals like minimizing greenhouse gas emissions, environmental pollution, the zero pollution ambition, of course, and indeed maximizing efficiency and resource use. In terms of sustainable by design criteria, I think it was mentioned before, energy and circularity. I believe that circularity is the key feature here because it opens the door also for enhanced safety, both safety and energy savings consideration. So indeed, it is very important to keep this in mind and indeed use this as a primary concern. Of course, SSBD principles together as a whole need to be respected during the whole overall lifetime of the products, materials and chemicals. In this sense, particular attention has to be paid to the holistic design of systems as opposed to just products, and the adoption of a life cycle thinking. Just to be precise, what I mean is we need to try to avoid design practices that cause burden shifting from one domain to the other. For instance, from health to climate change and vice versa, or even between media, from water to sludge, from water to soil, and so on and so forth. So it is important to keep a holistic, systemic view of the overall product and material lifetime, including the process development and the actual industrial innovation and production aspects. In the next slide, we will try to address the next question, which had to do with how we actually implement the SSBD criteria. In this sense, we're talking about, actually in PARC, we're talking about a 7-year duration of a project, of a very large project that is actually allows the room for a stepwise approach. Indeed, the idea is to start from a building on a consensual and sort of and stakeholder engagement basis, a recommendation and guideline document within the next few years, and to be coupled indeed on towards the development of a certification scheme, as mentioned I think before. But here we all already said that we need to have tools to assess both the criteria implemented in actual performance with regard to these criteria. And in this sense, we need to have specific tools, a toolbox that can allow both industry, but also regulatory authorities to check the adhere to check, assess the performance. So the toolbox is an innovation side we can definitely focus on. Here, this toolbox has to describe methods with which critical properties of chemicals, products, and materials, but also the packaging and the application processes can be identified from early on in the innovation process in order to allow, indeed, a full-blown assessment of the overall system impacts. But of course, we need to make sure that we have to align with all the different types of developments at the international level that were mentioned before, also by Alexandra and Javier on the question of, for instance, OECD was mentioned, the US and the German specific approaches were mentioned. It is very important to be able to, the UN, to actually make sure that the work done in the EU is indeed aligned with these, and we can really create a functional worldwide system. On the next slide. We're looking at, what are the connections with the work done at the EC level. Here, of course, we have a number of issues, including the chemical strategy for sustainability, but also the European Platform for Life Cycle Assessment, the OECD guidance, and the technology platform, the European Technology Platform for Sustainable Chemistry. In this sense, again, the one key component of the work that's done in PARC is to develop the toolbox after the whole supporting the development of the concept and criteria. It is very important to increase the awareness among the involved parties, and I think this is a key intermediate step, if you want. We cannot really move on very far without having indeed highlighted the importance of these initiatives in all the different aspects, and I'm very happy with the discussion that is already being built in this workshop, both in the chat and in the panel. But indeed here, the job of the academics and the researchers, I think, is also a lot with regard to relevant to the development of tools and toolboxes to substantiate the application of these criteria. On the next slide, we have actually a specific list of activities, including which actually could support that. But the most relevant now, the question that comes to mind is, how do you start? What's the most relevant chemicals, materials, and products to start defining these criteria? Here, the idea is to deliver, of course, tools and methods and concepts so as to ensure the safety and sustainability goals prospectively in a progressive mode. So as far as we're concerned, we have a lot of experience in the PARC partnership on the projects highlighted already by Alexandra on the nanomaterials side, for instance. So that is we feel a low-hanging fruit. That was focusing on lessons learned from there, and actually even checking the effectiveness and transferability of the methodology and toolbox developed on these materials. But of course, this is something to be discussed in a open, more broad, consensual dialogue with the Commission, but also with the all the stakeholders to make sure that we can identify together examples and areas of priority that will actually bring the concept along. I mean, I personally do not believe in designing something and then implementing. And I believe in an iterative process where people are and all the stakeholders are really engaged, and we learn as we do, even though we have, of course, set out a number of goals from the beginning. So this kind of iterative process and sort of more, allow me, being Greek, and since we mentioned about the word criteria, in a more dialectic mode, I think this is indeed the way to move forward here. Indeed, in order to shape the criteria, but also to shape how to implement, to really bring about this mind shift that we're talking about, in order to be able to really meet the criteria that we will set together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dennis. a very rich presentation as well. So, and I got in time. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will have about 35 minutes now for a discussion. I'm a bit overwhelmed by the richness of the discussion in the chat already ongoing and all the questions which are being asked there. So, evidently, we'll have to focus on just a few aspects of what we were listening to this morning. A first question I'd like to submit to each of the panelists is related to the safe dimension, sustainable by design. As I can see, there's all sort of interpretations, possible misunderstandings. Is it risk-based? Is it hazard-based? And so on. So maybe in the order of the speakers, could I ask for your take on this? How do you define safe?
Yes.
And sorry, I should have asked our speakers to switch on your cameras so that analysts can see that you're all on board. Frida already is there as well, Dennis now as well. And then Dorota, maybe you can do the same thing. Okay, Anne, please.
Yes, yes. And thank you very much for the question. So how do you define safe was the question, and I could see other questions popping up. Well, in fact, safe should be defined on the basis of the hazards, of course, of a product, but we combine it indeed with a risk exposure to the user and also the impact on the environment. Now, that's where we align with REACH, with the current requirements, and also with the expected revisions. Now, does that mean that we limit the safe and sustainable by design efforts of the industry to safe and as I explained it with the risk aspect, far from it? You will see soon examples on our website, and I invite you to keep in touch there with Chemistry Can, where our companies are also looking into alternatives where I would say even when there is no risk, so that the substances are still safe to be used, but they are still being replaced, and we do move, and that was what I said, we do move there to improve cheap profiles. And so you can imagine components from braking fluids, we are changing, we see examples of companies changing to different solvents. So it's not an either-or question. So safe is designed, as I explained, but that does not exclude at all that we are not continuously inventing to move to move towards improved cheap profiles. And this is quite logic. This makes business sense because, of course, we see examples where the customers then can take less safety precautions. So we also believe that if you bring those considerations early on in your invention, it will bring products faster to the market, and it can be a cost reduction at the end. So it's this is what I wanted to say. It is what we define. I hope that is clear, but it does not exclude that we're not inventing. On the contrary, to meet what Ms. Hug there defined as we want to have less hazardous substances on the market. And clearly, maybe a final point. So the environmental impact is very important, and for that one, we do look also into the resources that we're using, the raw materials, and we all also considering the end of life and the circularity aspects in that equation. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. So, Dorota, same question for you. What is your take on the safe dimension of safe and sustainable by design?
Yeah, thank you. So as I said, safety should be included in all dimensions, environmental, social, and economic. If one looks at safety from the perspective of green chemistry only, then we are talking about non-toxic, non-hazardous, non-explosive materials. But from our perspective, we need much more. We need materials that also doesn't endanger our environment for us nowadays and also for future generations. So as the previous speaker already said, we need to focus on the whole life cycle. We need to make sure that also the resources are extracted properly on the safe way for us now and for future generations, that we do not use all the resources available at the moment, that we keep the products in closed circles, that we do not release them to the environment, and we really think about the degradation product, and that the chemicals are designed for the environmental mineralizations, and materials and products are designed for circularity. That's very important from our perspective. Thank you.
Very clear. Thank you, Dorota. Then we have Frida.
Yes, I think I touched more or less half my 6 minutes on this subject, so it rendered a lot of discussion, of course. But in our view, I mean, safe is something that is non-toxic, and that's very clearly stated in the chemical strategy for sustainability as well. We want a non-toxic economy and move towards that. And safe is really about that, the intrinsic properties of the chemicals included, in both for a chemical and also chemicals included in products and material. And for us, it's very important that this is not traded against something else, that it's okay, that it's not safe if it's used for something good. We need to be able, and I have a strong belief in the chemical industry in the EU, to be able to innovate and make safe and sustainable materials and products for us.
Thank you, Frida. Can I ask you a follow-up question? I think most of the other panelists put a lot of emphasis on a life cycle approach. I believe that from your perspective, that was less relevant. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, I mean, for life cycle assessment it might be a good tool, but for this specific criteria, I don't really believe in that, or we don't really believe in that. Because there is a possibility to put an emphasis on specific aspects. And here we need clear and criteria that could be used multiple times to be able to compare the products and materials and chemicals. And for life cycle assessment, they are very complex. And our concern is a bit that we make the criteria too complex. We think that, of course, you need to include a lot of parameters, but you also need to make it manageable. And maybe we also need to start with the core issues, move forward and add additional ones instead of taking on the whole world from the beginning, because then our concern is that we might get stuck. And life cycle assessment in some aspect can be a bit about this, if you have doing good in one end, you can do a little bit sort of bad in another end, and this waging. And that we don't believe in that. We need to have clear-cut criteria. That's our belief.
Thank you. And then, Dennis, you were actually one of the people making this point on life cycle assessment. So maybe you could give us your take on the one hand, the definition of what safe really means, and then why you think life cycle assessment truly is essential.
Actually, I really would like to, thanks a lot. I really would like to say that we mean safe through the life cycle. Indeed, that's the point here. So, indeed, okay, safety has to do with non-toxic, indeed, and I think there's a lot of to be done in terms by way of. I'm a chemical engineer by training, so with molecular engineering, if you like, the green chemistry side, that is obvious that it needs to be done. But at the same, and I think everybody would agree on that. What I think we need to underline is that it's not about molecular engineering only, it's also about the process of the industrial production process, the consumption process and use of materials and products, but also their disposal and eventually their treatment as waste or residue in the end. And at some point, so this is really to cover the whole life cycle with regard to the safety aspects of the life cycle. And this actually puts forward another key dimension. Once you talk about life cycle, we really talk about time. And indeed, the questions of degradation in the environment, degradation of byproducts is very important. I will just recall to everybody that benzene, a carcinogen, is not carcinogenic as a molecule. What is carcinogenic is actually its metabolites. So they're biological degradation products, so to speak. So from that perspective, I think it is very important to, if we really want to produce a safe environment and a non-toxic environment, this is our ambition of all of us, I think. We need to be able to include and sort of bring together life cycle considerations with the safety component in it. Indeed, I believe that it is important to take a look at the different dimensions, the quote-unquote potential trade-offs, not necessarily to do them, but to recognize them, to see what it is that actually affects overall safety in the overall life cycle, and then we can make a decision. It is not all too complex. If we have the tools to do life cycle, we have the tools to do very good safety assessment right now with REACH, and not only, and the revision of REACH. So it is the time to bring these dimensions together, two families of tools together, and indeed create a safety assessment based on the life cycle operation.
Thank you so much. So now I have a question for Anne. Anne, in your introduction, in your presentation, you were referring to other criteria when it came to safety as well. So what other criteria would you have in mind, and what would be your view on how this would be developed and what it could mean in a regulatory context?
Yeah, thank you for that. And this links, I would say, very nicely with what we just heard about life cycle and about trade-offs, right? So other criteria, what could it mean? Well, an easy one, or no, a very difficult one, but a good one to understand is, like, you need to think in your safe and sustainable by design, you need to start thinking what would be the fate of your chemical product, of your process to cure, but here it is end of life. So that is what we would say, like, these are the other criteria you need to start to think of. This needs to become within your consideration when you start to design a substance or develop a material. Yes, you refer to how would you do that to the regulatory context, and I think that's where it starts to become difficult, right? So on safety, you have most of the time, you have very clear cutoffs. But when it comes to what is your contribution to circularity, or when it comes to what is your contribution to climate, it's already then a clear cut of an absolute value for a product. That's very hard to do, if not impossible, right? So how would that be done then? And there we are now taking that, what we should do is then indeed make an assessment, to try to assess the impact, and then you should think like, well, this impact should not be negative. We cannot negatively impact the goals of circularity or negatively impact the climate neutrality. So that's just one example, but there are many more in that area. And it does relate indeed to the kind of trade-off discussion we just had. I think there is a misunderstanding if people would walk away from this stakeholder event by saying that we would trade off on safety. We would never trade off on safety, right? Because that's I don't know who said it from the introductory speakers, but it starts. That's the basis of a safe and sustainable by design concept. But if you are then indeed inventing, or you're putting processes in place, which then have, for instance, a good benefit on the energy side, but would start to use more water. So where do you put the emphasis on? And that's the type also of trade-offs we would be imagining in this case. So trade-offs, I don't like the word trade-offs. I think a better word is really that you start saying we need to take a decision, a bit what the professor just said ahead of me, like take a life cycle, and certainly not an LCA analysis, but take a life cycle view, try to assess the impacts in the different areas of the life cycle, also in different receiving compartments, air, water, soil, and then you need to make a kind of informed judgment on where you want to put your emphasis on for that particular product application combination.
Thank you so much, Anne. I have now a question for Dorota, but I'd like to invite the other speakers as well to come in if you feel you can contribute to it. And the question really relates to how we go about developing a safe and sustainable by design approach at an early stage of the innovation process. So it all starts with a bright new idea. And at such a stage, it is very often hard to assess the safety and sustainability of the product or the substance due to low data quality, and hence this will generate high uncertainty. So how can we go about this? What sort of tests could we think of? What can really be proposed? Dorota.
That's a very difficult question. So for sure, the communication and the transparency is definitely needed in the early stage of product development, and also including thinking of all these possible criteria. We don't have any criteria at the moment. I'm sorry, I hear some noises in the background. Okay.
She said that.
Yeah, we definitely should think about the product development to design for circularity, and in some cases it's very individual for each process, for each product, and it also depends on its application. So, for example, we could think about if the product or the process can be kept in circle, if that's released to the environment or not. Definitely what can be very beneficial, it's the discussion with different sectors, with the people who will deal with the product in the end of life and so on. We can use different assessment tools that are already available, like LCA is of course very helpful, but it does not include all the aspects. So it does not include, for example, resource anticipation. And I think here we still have to learn a lot. How can we do it? What should be improved? What can we done at early stage of technology development? And I keep asking myself too, when is the moment to start thinking about it? Because on one hand, we also need basic research when we can see what is possible, what can we use the new material or new product for, but we have to find a compromise somewhere between this basic research and looking for possible applications and what is possible, and checking what is safe, what is more sustainable. But I'm also curious what the other speakers could say about that.
Indeed. Would any of the other speakers like to come in on this? Maybe Dennis.
Yes, sorry, I was muted. Yes, actually, I think indeed the question of testing criteria in this regard is a bit more complex. I think there's the scope for a more structured way of decision making, essentially, because a test in the end is a decision element, gives it elements to make decisions upon them. So I think we should think of what is the structured decision making process for assessing safety and sustainability, actually, more particular sustainability, in taking into account also the temporal dimension that I mentioned, and of course also the receptors dimension. One thing that we have not discussed today yet is the question of who receives the impacts. So we talked about the ecosystem, but we need to talk also about vulnerability in populations. I think, and that has, of course, also economic repercussions. So I think these elements have to be taken into account in a structured decision-making mode. There are different models on how to do that, theoretical models and concepts. I think we can jointly, as a community, come up with a viable approach, and that would actually define the kind of tests that we would need to be able to support the decision-making process.
Very well. Anybody else who wants to come in on this? Okay, then we move to.
And can I say something?
Yes, please.
Yes. So I just want to comment. I mean, on the presentation we heard before about the approach, and I'm very glad to see that DGRT are taking on concepts and criteria that are already available, and looking into these, for example, the different kind of consumer choices brands we have, and which really I think could be an important basis for a start of defining these criteria. So I was very pleased to see that already included in this work you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind remark. Very well. Then I have a question to our panelists. Would you think that new and innovative business models such as excuse me, chemicals as a service would incentivize safe and sustainable by design? And in what way could that possibly be accomplished? Maybe we start with you again, Frida.
I definitely think that, new business models are definitely needed to move into a circular economy. And I think there are different, there are different ways, and I think we have a lot of companies that are very, committed to move towards sustainability and circularity, and they are working very hard. And I think what's helping them is really, as I stated in my intervention, that they need very clear criteria and clear direction from policymakers. The chemical strategy is one clear direction for them, that this is the right way to move, and that we also have a clear message to the ones producing alternatives and safe and sustainable products and materials, to get that incentives and that strong message. But also clear criteria I think are very good for them to move forward.
Very well. Maybe Dorota?
Yes, I'm definitely sure that such models can be very beneficial for sustainable chemistry, as they are focused on function of the chemicals, not of their quantities. So, for example, when we have the model of chemical leasing, there the focus is on the proper use of chemicals, and that's the win-win situation. So the provider provides services and the function, not only chemicals. And in such case, the quantity of chemicals is the minimum needed, and there is also a knowledge exchange. So the producer, the provider, is focused to deliver the function or the service that the customer needs, and he is not interested in selling the high amounts of his chemicals. So it's win-win situation in that case. Moreover, the flow of the chemicals and the circularity in that case is increased. The producers are also interested to get back the products, or they even have to. Sometimes that depends on the model and the contract, but they are interested to gain the resources again, so they have lower investment costs. So I think such models are beneficial for both for customers and for providers, and on top of that for environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorota. Dennis, on business models.
Yeah, I think actually, thanks a lot. I think we live through a bit of a schizophrenic world in this sense, because as consumers, many or as citizens, many times I say not I, but we overall think sometimes of chemicals as threats, and then we actually leave the chemicals as a service. That's what we live. We use the products which have used the chemicals to obtain service. So in practice, that's how we live. That is not reflected in the business models, and I think there is a need to move towards direction. I think it will definitely incentivize, to answer your question, the move towards safe and sustainable by design. And I agree with all that was said before on this point. One thing we need to pay attention to, especially talking with Elena, a workshop that has to do a lot with innovation and RTD, is the question of intellectual property rights and questions of competition. These have to be resolved in this more service-oriented business model, and I think there's good scope within this initiative to actually address this. I think it would be a key point. When I was involved among the team that actually drafted the REACH regulation, and indeed the questions of communication information across the value chain was a key component then. It still is a key issue right now. So I think it is a time, if we're moving towards a new mind shift in this world, to actually address this issue. It will definitely facilitate this transition.
Thank you so much. Anne?
Yeah, Yeah, thank you. Well, a lot of what I had in mind to say was already said by the previous speakers, and I agree with what has been said. I think, and it was Mr. Kestutis who said, like, the SSB, Safe and Sustainable by Design, will be the DNA of the multiple transition. And I think, like, this is for me the key. Will it now be the new chemicals as a service or new business models that need sustainability by design, that incentivize vice versa? I think it's all part of the same movement that we have to go through. Yes, there are new business models that will help in reaching the sustainability goals. Clear, the resource challenges are there. Yes, there is still an issue that it's not always accepted, and the rules, for instance, on green public procurement are not really always aligned to make sure that this can be done. So there's still a lot of work, but it can definitely help in reaching the ambitions that we have here. Will clear criteria help? Yeah, most likely. Or I would say definitely the one aspect that I felt was missing in by the previous speakers, although there was some reference to it, is if we start to think about chemistry tomorrow, in 10 years and 20 years, what we are witnessing is already this digital revolution as well. And I think this is something where we cannot imagine what would be possible tomorrow, right? So this information exchange on what is there in the products, that will definitely help, I think, to give a push to creating closed loops of materials that can come back, that can safely be managed. So I also want to point to there's an important aspect. And another very important aspect is we talked a lot about safe and sustainable by design, but safe and sustainable by design needs to be done within a network, within a community. It will require all partners to work together. We can imagine the safest substance of the world, but if it doesn't reach the application, it's no use, right? So that's another area where I think we need to stress this collaboration. And in that aspect, any chemical as a service really starts from this really needs this type of collaborative models where you can actually start to exchange. We've had models of, we had examples of companies that really start now to engage with the end user and say, well, you asked me to give you this, but if I'd offer you this alternative, well, you might just have a nicer recyclable product. So that's how I see the broader interpretation growing of chemicals as a service and new business model. It is this intensified collaboration that will definitely help us in reaching the safe and sustainable by design goals.
Very well. And I'm picking up one of the last questions here. So we are sitting here amongst Europeans. So we're looking at things from a European perspective. And of course, we want to push very much for this green transition agenda. I want to be the world leader on that. But of course, when we're talking about global supply chains, then we have to work with our international partners. So what would your approach or idea be on how we can best accomplish this? Maybe start with you again.
Yes, I am muted. I think the past crisis learned us that we are indeed depending on global material flows and global value chains. So I would say that if we want to reach this objective, we need to start having the global community on board. And obviously, I mean, we have a role to play in that because we have also global companies, but we need to really get all regions on board. That is my take on your question. I could expand more, but time is getting short here.
Indeed. Dorota, the international dimension.
Yeah, I fully agree with Anne. We need to have everyone on board. Sometimes, in some cases, it might be difficult, but I don't think that we could ever be separated from the rest of the world because we cannot do that. We don't have all the resources needed for that in Europe. And There is already a lot of activities all over the world of different institutions, such as IC3, for example, to bring on board other countries and other regions. And I believe we have to continue, and I hope we will success.
Thank you. Frida.
Yes, I also agree. Of course, we are, part of the world, and but I also see I'm not so sure that everyone needs to be on board, but we need to move in this direction, and the rest will follow. I'm certain of that, and I think that European policy could be an inspiration for many, and also European industry. And I think we can have had a benefit, because I think this is where the whole world is heading eventually.
Thank you. Dennis?
Actually, I fully agree with Frida on this one. When I was much younger, I went to study at Berkeley, and at the time, it was a time when the Clean Air Act had come across in the US, of course, and my professor said that if something is done in the Bay Area, it will be done in the world, environmentally speaking. And I was sort of, me being Greek, coming from Europe, I was going, that's too much. Why are you saying this? And he actually explained that if something happens in the Bay Area and then taken up by Los Angeles, it becomes a state issue. The neighboring states to California take it up, and then it becomes a federal issue in the U.S. And once the U.S. takes it up, then it goes to the OECD, and then it goes to the world. And that was a chain that at the time sort of amazed me and sort of mesmerized me. I felt, cannot be like that. That we're not forced to do what the Americans are doing. But indeed, that's the case. That's what happened in the air pollution domain, and that's what happened reversely in the chemical domain with REACH. So I'm proud to be European and having worked on REACH. Indeed, that's the way to bring about change. You actually keep your mind open and the networking and talk with everybody, but you move ahead, and you move ahead in the right direction, and then people actually start to follow.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dennis. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are slowly approaching the end of this debate. I have one question which I'm going to ask to our panelists, and I'd like to ask the panelists to be brief and focused in your reply. We'll start with you, Dennis. So, which would really be the chemicals or the materials or the sectors where you think we should have a very hard look first to try and develop this safe and sustainable by design concept?
Yeah, I did. One thing that I have mentioned in my presentation was the question of nanomaterials and sort of taking stock from that. I think that's very important to do that, also because of the high penetration of nano in a whole number of products and services as well. So that's one key sector. Second one, I would think the question of plasticizers and having all the endocrine disrupting potential is very important. And of course, we need to look at sectors with products that actually, as you said, can be very persistent in the environment for a long time. These are the ones that we would need to be able to check. Persistent and also mobile. I think this is very important.
Very clear. Frida.
Thank you. Well, that's difficult to choose, right? But I agree with Denise with that the sectors that use a lot of harmful chemicals that have many concerns. And I think also plastic is an important area as well, textile, electronics, but also consumer products, where we have seen that there are a lot of problematic chemicals used. I think would be a very good start.
Clear. Dorota?
Yeah, I think I already mentioned that in my speech. So the chemicals and materials products that are not kept in the loop and are released to the environment, they are a very big issue. They are released in high quantities and have very strong adverse impact. Among them are pharmaceuticals, fertilizers, pesticides, biocides, and detergents. The other group are complex products, and they have here different issues and maybe different dimensions. So here the problem is that they cannot be reused, recycled, or properly separated. Sometimes they are not properly collected. And they also end up in the environment, or they are incinerated. And in that case, we lose a lot of precious materials and resources, which is a very difficult problem to be addressed. And materials that are crucial for sustainable development and low carbon technologies, we link a lot of our hopes now to reduce CO2 emissions. And we base on renewable energy or carbon neutral LNG, low carbon industrial processes, for example, power to X or green catalytic reactions, digital technologies, electromobility, and all of them, they require very high amount of metals. And here we can talk about very strong competitive use. And in case of that products, we have to make sure that we have enough also for future generations. So we have to address circularity aspects in that case. So as I said, different products, different dimensions, different aspects, different problems for all of them, but all of them need to be urgently addressed.
Thank you. And then on to conclude, 30 seconds.
30 seconds, yes. So a lot of good points were already raised by the previous speaker, so I'm not going to repeat those. I think what could be a source to start is really to look at the work that ECHA is doing actually on its integrated regulatory strategy there. And the mapping, I think, and the chemical universe, I think that could be a starting point looking there. And then I heard suggestions like which end up in environment, etc. So then try to figure out which of those that find themselves under a regulatory measure, which of those would then be the first to tackle, right? So that's where we would suggest to look further into.
Thank you, Ram. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to join me in a round of applause for the panelists. You're allowed to open your mics to do this. I think we have had a very rich debate, very good discussion. Just for the participants in the meeting, none of the questions were prepared, so the speakers really had to improvise their responses on the spot. They did wonderful. And with this, we have brought the first panel discussion to a conclusion. We'll reconvene at 11:40, which is 8 minutes from now sharp, with the second panel, which will have more policymakers and regulatory authorities in the panel. So we'll learn from them and their perspective then. So we reconvene at 11:40. Please stay connected in the meantime, and we hope to see you back in a few minutes. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's 11:40, and this is where we start again. Now with the second panel, which will be looking into current definitions of safe and sustainable by design. Again, we have 4 panelists, which I will introduce each time they come on board. And we will be starting with Mar Gonzalez, who is with OECD, where she joined the Environment, Health and Safety Division in 2004. She's responsible for the Nano Safety Program. So, Mar, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Because I'm experiencing some problems with my camera, so I can see that it's black, but I can't see myself. So I don't know if you can see me.
I cannot see you. I can hear you.
Okay, well, that's a good starting. So if you don't mind, I will be hidden in the black screen and I will start presenting so we can move
Very
on.
well. We see your presentation.
Thank you so much. So if we can just go to the next slide, please. So today, I just want to thank you for inviting OECD to share with you the work we're doing. Today, I would like to present to you recent work done by different OECD expert groups. I really hope that the information and documents can contribute to the discussion initiated by this workshop. So I will start by saying that earlier this month, my colleagues released this guidance document. It is focused on the identification and selection of safer chemicals alternatives. The guidance aims to advance the discussion regarding a general approach and criteria for the selection of safer alternatives, and the focus is really on chemical substitution. So specifically, this guidance aims for future requirements to determine that a chemical alternative is safer than the one it will substitute. And you will find the link in the presentations that will be made available afterward, if I understood correctly. So the next slide, please. So another area that is currently underway is a discussion for the design of sustainable plastics from a chemical perspective. So OECD has organized a global forum on this topic and recently hosted a virtual workshop to continue the discussion on embedding sustainable chemistry thinking at the design stage. The group responsible has developed a number of case studies to identify trends. And based on this, they will be developing a document outlining general consideration that I hope that we can have this document available for you later this year. And the final slide, please. We can go to the next slide. So on this slide, what I would like to share with you is a report that we published in December on moving towards safer innovation approach for more sustainable nanomaterials and nano-enabled products. So this report was developed by the Working Party on Manufactured Nanomaterials with special thanks to France, the Netherlands, industry, and the EU GRC that led the development of this project. So we were obviously pushed by the scope of our work, which is on nanomaterials, and more recently on future nano, more advanced nanomaterials, or some of you that have also called a smart nano, etc. And it was also the recognition that perhaps existing approaches to chemicals, including what we have right now for nanomaterials, might not be fully applicable, or it will be a bit more challenging to address more complex substances, materials being developed, in particular if we consider the pace of innovation. As such, we started a discussion on how to incorporate the safer by design approach. And the first step was really to review the different initiatives and publications that could support future decision-making when developing more sustainable products. So our attempt is to really find a way to further promote a dialogue between the innovator and the regulator. So starting at an early phase of the innovation process, so what we're addressing as the safer by design concept, to reduce uncertainties and risk to human environmental safety. But also on the other hand, how can we allow or facilitate the task of regulators to anticipate regulatory challenge posed by innovative nanomaterials or nano-enabled products in our case. And this will be more like the regulatory preparedness. So these two distinct components together is what we called in our document the safer innovation approach. So the first report developed working descriptions to have a common language or understanding between different jurisdictions. So this goes, obviously, the OECD work goes beyond EU countries. So we were trying really to find a common ground. And then we developed two inventories, one on existing risk assessment tools, frameworks, and initiatives developed for the Safer by Design, the lesson learned from this initiative from case studies applying the Safe by Design concept. And the second, an inventory of regulatory strategies for awareness and decision-making. The report, and I would like to stress, obviously builds on the learning from past initiatives to which we have grown very close with, such as those some important EU projects like NanoReg, NanoSafe, NanoCalibrate, and many others that, that have been developing Safe by Design components. And we have established a good mechanism to exchange information with the EU projects, and will continue to bridge with other newer projects to make sure that we align our approaches in moving forward. So just to conclude by saying that we will continue working in this area. This, as I said, this report was the first step in our considerations in this area. And we're really looking perhaps on how to bring this safer innovation approach from this old theoretical and very nice, less pragmatic, if you want, approach to something that can allow us to identify some criteria that can allow us to implement it. And also we have been discussing some considerations on moving from this only Safer by Design towards something where we could include the component, the sustainable component, safe and sustainable by design, or something more in line with that. So after listening to the opening remarks, I believe OECD can contribute in your discussions, and we really look forward to contribute in the future. And I speak from myself and from my colleague, Eva Leinala, who's also participating in this event. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mar. Very interesting indeed. Very clear, very nice scene setter. And looking forward to learn more about your report. We're now moving to Ronald Flippy, who is with the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, where he's working on the science policy interface. And Ronald is also a member of the Dutch delegation to IPCC. Ronald, the floor is yours. Ronald, if you're speaking, we cannot hear you. Is Ronald with us? Okay, at least at my end.
Ronald is on mute. He should be able to take the floor now.
Okay. Ronald, if you're hearing this and not able to speak, can you put something in the chat? Okay, so I suggest that while we're sorting out technical issues with Ronald's connection, that we then immediately move to Martin Wimmer. Martin Wimmer has a background in chemistry, and he's now working in public administration, but did a postdoc at Cornell. He's mainly working on REACH. He's also a member of Caracal, which is a Commission expert group and responsible for coordinating the national input into the European discussion of REACH and CLP. So, Martin. Here again, I'm not receiving anything.
let's try this way, maybe. Do you hear me?
We can hear you, Martin.
Okay, great.
Okay, very good.
Okay, sorry for that. My micro seems to have some problem. Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation and also for the introduction of myself. I'm, as you heard, I'm working in the policy context of REACH. So I ask you to be not too surprised that I will take now a bit narrower view on the subject safe and sustainable by design. Narrower on the one hand in the sense of the instrument I'm talking about. I will focus on REACH, and also narrow in the sense of the products I'm talking about. I will focus on chemicals and chemical mixtures that finally go on the market for the producing of goods. And now with that, we can jump into the first slide, please. Before this background, I show here a very simplified picture of what is happening in the chemical sector. We have, of course, a feedstock. From that, a manufacture of a chemical that is entering the market. It is eventually formulated and finally goes to the use, which is on the right side of this slide. And when it has to been used, and there are different types of users, of course, consumers, industrial processes, and of course also the production of articles. Finally, it will become waste. That is roughly the situation that we have now, and REACH is governing the process, and in particular the process on the left side, making sure that the right chemicals come on the market. And right chemicals within the REACH context means safe chemicals. Now, I will then speak in the next two slides about how we might be able to transfer within REACH the left side into a safe and sustainable by design sector. I already said we have their REACH, and that is where I come from. And I think we have there already a good instrument for driving industry towards producing safer substances, but not yet by design. Safety is only looked at from the moment that a chemical comes on the market. But there is a big time before when a chemical is developed. Now, what is left to be done to make it sustainable and safe by design, to make chemicals safe and sustainable by design is four things, I think. First, to generate sustainability indicators. We do have the safety indicators. These are the toxicity endpoints. We need sustainability indicators, preferably by the manufacturers generated. Then make sure this information goes down the supply chain. Then create a common tool for assessing the better alternative, which is, in our context, the chemical mixture, which is at the same time safer and more sustainable. And this is bringing us back to the discussion this morning, where it actually was very much about exactly this point, and where I think that the research project that you have in mind is exactly important and urgent. And finally, of course, to drive the chemical sector towards safer and more sustainable alternatives. I hear something in the there is a viable measure already of sustainability, and that is the product environment footprint. So my first advocation is to integrate this into REACH. And I was very happy to see that the Commission proposed exactly that in the chemical strategy for sustainability. There is secondly the need to put the information of these indicators down the supply chain, and here also REACH has already a good instrument, which is a safety data sheet. So just integrate the PEF in the safety data sheet. There is finally a pressing need to have an alternatives assessment tool, and I think this is very much will be the focus of the discussion in the next 2 years. And finally, to implement, in my view, green chemistry into the REACH manufacturing sector to create what I would call a sustainable REACH. Can you go to the next slide? This is the last one. Okay, and here it is, my vision. I should say at this point that in Austria we have developed, and I'm happy to be also in charge of this, developed a platform on green chemistry with experts from all fields, from education to industry, NGOs, and of course research. And we do think that discussing and bringing forward green chemistry in the chemical sector is one of the major preliminary or major presumptive activities that we need to have if we want to have a full sustainable production sector. So the idea here is to have, before a manufacturing of a chemical, in the whole process, before that, a safe and sustainable by design principle implemented in the chemicals industry. And our suggestion is, again, not to start from the scratch, but to use the 12 principles of green chemistry that we have already. It's a standard to which most of research articles in this area are referring to. It has the 5 important objectives which we see here: maximize renewables, make an efficient design, energy as well as material efficient, minimize toxicity, ensure safe production, and minimize waste. I think these are the major issues, and I think we must bring industry towards the point where each and every chemist working there has this in mind. And then we have the already known process. And here my suggestion would be to have a sustainable and, to have a safety and sustainability data sheet there, communicating the information on both indicators down the supply chain up to down to the safe and sustainable production consumption sector. And now we have 2 important back loops from this. One is the blue one, which you see on top of this figure. It is that the production sector must inform the process of safe and sustainable by design by at least 2 important informations: what properties do we need? And secondly, which chemicals do we not want? And I think here Frida will have a huge list of those. And on the other hand, we have also an important waste loop. And I see already the picture of the time taker, so I have to close. But I just want to say about this brown down line back loop. And that, of course, goes from waste to recycling to renewable materials, which should go material-wise into the manufacture. Let me say that this is not a national position. This is my vision, but I'm working in my country towards this vision, and I hope that we will come to that in our green platform as well as on the European level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Very clear. I'm sure you will be very successful in promoting our vision within Austria. I haven't received confirmation that we have Ronald on board already, although I know we are talking to him. So we'll first move to Xenia. Xenia is with the European Environmental Agency, where she works on cross-cutting issues related to risk governance of chemicals, including safe and sustainable by design. She has a PhD in analytical chemistry. Xenia, please.
Thank you very much, Berend, and thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting and discussing the safe and sustainable by design criteria and the process to get there. And next slide, please. So first of all, I want to go back to what was discussed this morning. Why do we need safe and sustainable by design? Well, as was outlined by Joel and Kęstutis, we have the European Green Deal, and it's not just about achieving climate neutrality. We are really trying to achieve multiple goals here of preventing pollution, environmental degradation, stop the biodiversity loss, resource depletion, etc., and all at the same time. And the reason we are trying to do that is that we want to avoid harm to planet and the people, and especially the harm that is chronic, is irreversible, and cannot be changed. And to do that, we need to think about how we can do that the best. And we know that preventing harm is always more effective than trying to cure a harm that has already been occurred. And sometimes when harm has occurred, we cannot, change it back. Have you extinguished a species, it won't come back. Have you forever polluted your water resources, you cannot really clean it up. And that is why there's the focus in the chemical strategy really to avoid the use of substances of concern or chemicals of concern. And they are outlined there. They include some of the chemicals that are already, or the intrinsic properties that are already outlined to be avoided, like CMR substances and persistent substances, but they go beyond and also start to consider chemicals that are causing developmental toxicities, such as endocrine disruptors, neurotoxic and immunotoxic substances, as well as those affecting workers. And really, safe and sustainable by design is one of the tools to achieve that. Next, please. And so the question is then, why do we focus on the design phase? Well, really, the design phase is where we have most flexibility in choosing how to produce a service in the best way to create a function that works, but and which is sufficient for the purpose. And this design phase is really one which is applied by industry. At the same time, we need to think about the life cycle, not just the first life cycle, but also the subsequent life cycles. So, because we want to conserve resources and make sure that we have clean food, air, water, and resources, not just for ourselves, but also for the future generations. Next, please. So the safe and sustainable by design phase, to get a little bit more practical, what does it cover? Well, this is from our European Environment Agency web briefing, which came out here in February 2021, where we outlined some of the considerations for the design phase. It really starts with a multidisciplinary design of a product. That could be a more broadly understood product like chemical product or material or final product. And in the first stage, we want to avoid using chemicals of concern, because we really want, to be future-proof. We want to ensure that that everything we already now suspect could be of a concern, we shouldn't use, because that will give us trouble further down the line, as was outlined by Frida, but also by Dorota. So in the first stage, we want to have people sitting together with multiple skills to think about what is the service of the product, what is the technical performance, consider how to make it circular by design so it can be used, repaired, recycled, and durable, and what is really the chemical function that the chemical plays there. Next, please. And then, of course, when we come up with some candidates, we hope that we can do this service without use of chemicals of concerns. But in the few cases where that's not possible, it might be that there are essential uses of specific chemicals of concern that currently are essential. And then, we should start looking into finding alternative ways of providing that service. But then it continues, and we start thinking about the life cycle. What are the different impacts along the life cycle? And we assess the impacts. Then we should compare it with some criteria that we are discussing here today, the process to set up how to decide on those criteria. And finally, you can go ahead and produce the product. Next, please. And so a little bit about, what could these criteria be? And we have had a lot of discussion this morning about should it be risk-based, should it be hazard-based, should you have trade-offs, etc. But the way we see it is that we have multiple goals here. So if we start avoiding chemicals of concern to begin with, we have the chemicals that we think are more likely to be mineralizable in the environment, that are not persistent, etc. Then we start looking at the different impacts of producing a product here. And here we have, next please, here we have many different considerations, but what is most important here is that we need to think about how to set minimum criteria. So we don't do something that is really good for the climate neutrality, but is really bad for instance, for the ecosystem impacts or the resource efficiency. Next, please. And this is really done then to avoid a burden shifting across the different priorities and protection goals of the European Green Deal. And in doing that, we hope that we can create trust in the safe and sustainable by design, and that we can achieve these protection goals of society, but also to give industry a way to compare across different products. Next, please. And finally, to achieve all of this, we need to have an enabling environment. We have at least 3 different dimensions here. We have the policies. We should have coherence across policies, whether they are on the chemicals, on the safe product initiatives, on investments and research. Next, please. And here the sustainable finance is important to consider bringing the criteria into the sustainable finance criteria. We should also think about education. Do our people that are making the decisions in the design phase have the right competences? Should they be further educated? And finally, next please. We need to make sure that we have technical support centers that can provide some good guidance, certifications, harmonizations of documentation of compliance. And we need to have compliance methods that are applicable both for processes, for materials, and also for the end of life and new life of materials. And next, please. And next. And with that, I want to thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look very much forward to continue the discussions with all of you and with industry and the authorities. Thank you.
Well, deserves to thank you, Xenia, for being part of this workshop. Thank you so much. So, if everything is well, we should have now Ronald with us. I already introduced Ronald to you. He's with the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. Ronald.
I'm here. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in that case, we were trying to find a replacement for me, but if it's not necessary, I'd like to say good morning to everybody. I'm pleased to see so many have joined this important workshop. I will present some experience and views on safe and sustainable by design from the Netherlands. But as everybody, I need to be concise, so I will be a bit snappy, probably. Next slide, please. It is important that safe and sustainable by design is a means to speed up innovation towards the societal goals of a toxic-free economy and keeping within the Earth carrying capacity. Could you give it a notch, the slide? Yes. And another one. And yes. And that means that industry will have to do safe by design. Next one. Government will have to create an enabling environment for safe by design. Next one. Science will have to develop and describe methodologies to do safe by design, and yet another one. Practitioners who have to do the safe by design have to be educated in doing safe by design. Yes, next slide, please. Well, it's important to realize that in order to be successful, you need to know the conditions, demands, and requirements for what you are designing, be it a substance, material, product, service, or a business model, and that as a developer, you can't know that all. So it's very much needed to have a connection to the entire value chain. It means continuous cooperation in the chain, and next to that, designer teams need to have different expertise, because perhaps we want to replace a chemical by another chemical, but perhaps we don't, and we need to go to non-chemical solutions. So you also have to have expertise on materials, but toxicology also, because you want to know about the later impacts and environmental impacts. And of course, you want to know the market that you're designing something for, because without market access, invention is no innovation. Furthermore, as I said, designers need to be trained to do safe by sustainable and know the methodologies they can use. They need to focus on replacing the functionalities of a substance, not the substance per se. They have to consider the need for that functionality, and also the level in which to what that functionality has to be performed. I think there, in practice, you can see that there is a number of cases where actually what you make is too good, unnecessarily good. So that's also important to keep in mind. What you then do is you, in the beginning, you have a large number of options. You assess them, and you discard them if they're not up to scratch, and you develop the remaining ones further and further until you have the optimal one in the end as a result. And next to the training and expertise, of course, you want to assess the possible risks and the possible sustainability implications as early as you can. And for that, you will need data, and those data will have to be fair. They have to be well disclosed, and you have to be able to use them. That's a very important thing, I'd say. Next slide, please. Yes. There are, it is difficult to determine what actual products have been made through safe and sustainable design, at least from a policymaker point of view, but there are a number of examples that we can look at. All the practices that are being developed, being called green chemistry, have very nice examples. In pharmaceuticals, the drugs that are being developed, there is an assessment early on in the development where you look at the effects and the side effects, and so you select doing that. Of course, in pharmaceuticals, it's only directed at wanted impact on humans and unwanted side effects, not on environment and other aspects. And in construction, there is safe and sustainable by design in construction, but it's actually directed at the results of the construction, not at the process, while we are looking at the process. But it is comprehensive in the sense that it is about the building process, the using of the building, and the demolition. All of them have to be safe. And that's something that we can also use in developing safe and sustainable by design to replace harmful chemicals. Next, please. Yes, in the Netherlands, we do have a number of nice examples, and there will be some links. There is, for instance, Circo, and that's a project where small and medium enterprises in the Netherlands are being helped developing a circular economy model, circular products. And in our mind, we could try to add safety to that, so that will be safe and sustainable, because one of the things we think is very important, that particularly small and medium enterprises, they don't have the expertise, and they don't for themselves develop the necessary concentration, the necessary focus on something outside what they're trying to develop in the primary functionality. So that's good. We had some experiences with the University of Twente, where PhDs in material science were developing products, and they were given the explicit commission to do that safe by design. Then we have a project in the Netherlands, that's the left one, where we invite firms with initiatives to make those initiatives known, and then we talk to them and see how we can help them. There also have been a number of nice experiences in the NanoNXNL and the NanoRec projects, where, of course, these are projects that were being made possible by the European Commission, but we participated in them. We had a relatively big role, so we are proud of that as well. Finally, the last slide, please. Yes. I'd like to say that in our mind, safe by design is a mindset. You need to think in another way about designing. It is about the design process, and it will have a positive impact on the result. It will, for instance, lead to finding what is possible instead of trying to get to the standards and answer to them. And the result will be that innovation will be quicker, and safety and sustainability will develop faster. And of course, you want to take along the whole whole sectors in that. So progressively, you'll be able to set more ambitious standards for safety and sustainability. The concept of safe by design, safe and sustainable by design, is akin to responsible care in the outside world. So you have to be transparent on what you're doing, show it, and others will help you and be critical on what you're doing, and that feedback will help you to even improve further on what you're doing. It's also akin to continuous quality improvement, and we think that safe and sustainable by design will also help to improve resource efficiency. Of course, there's an important role for governments as well. This is a very big thing for industry to do. We think that the role of governments is to monitor how the enabling factors that are necessary to do safe and sustainable by design in practice develop. And if they lack, they should do their best and improve those enabling factors. That's what I intended to say. Thank you very much, and hope you learn much and enjoy the workshop as much as I do.
Thank you very much. Here, an echo. Okay, very well. So these were the introductions by all the panel members. I remind the participants in the workshop that you are still very welcome to list your questions in the chat box, which we are monitoring, and evidently we'll only be able to deal with a selection of those questions. Before entering there, I'd like to return to Ronald immediately. Ronald, in your opening statement, you described safe and sustainable by design as an enabler of innovation. I would like to put to you that maybe it is the other way around, that innovation is even needed as an enabler to get to safe and sustainable by design. How would you comment on that?
Well, we need some innovation in terms of methodology and tools to best be able to do safe and sustainable by design. So in that time of that use the word innovation, I think you're absolutely right. But I think by thinking through thoroughly what you're trying to achieve as early as possible and as holistically as possible in the design process, you push innovation faster and further. That's why I brought this forward.
Okay, very well. Thank you so much. Now, let's see what questions we have. Okay, here's a question which was addressed to Xenia, but I think which probably would be of interest to all the panelists. I read it out. It also came up in the previous panel. Should economic considerations be included in the criteria for safety? For example, if a chemical is known to have an unacceptable hazard, but at the same time it is of high economic value, what should shape decision-making whether this chemical remains in use or not? Xenia.
Thank you. So I think the economic dimension is something which is not included in the safe and sustainable by design, because really the starting point is thinking about what is the service that we want to have for, I mean, that could be the service of keeping you dry or the service of cleaning, etc. And you can achieve that in various ways. And therefore, by starting saying avoiding chemicals of concern, and then thinking about how can you provide that service in various ways, then you can choose between those various ways or design candidates and take the economic considerations into account at that point.
Very clear. Any of the other panelists who would like to come in on this? I don't see any volunteers.
Maybe this discussion actually hooks into the discussion about essential use. So yes, if something is essential for the functioning of society, for human health, for instance, in a direct way, then you have to make the consideration whether you can prolong the use of something, but you also always have to strive for replacing it by a better option, an alternative. So yes, but actually I don't think this is part of the discussion about safe and sustainable by design. It's discussion about how do I deal with essential use and allowing what is allowable.
And just to complement what Ronald said, I agree with you, and I also showed in my presentations that when trying to achieve a function, there might be certain cases where you cannot achieve that function without the use of chemicals of concern. And that is what triggers then that, it is then essential, currently essential, but for the functioning of health, functioning of society and for the health of people. But to my understanding, that is there's no economic consideration involved in that assessment. But of course, we still see that these terms are being developed. So, I mean, that is, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, maybe just to add, I would like to agree with both my previous speakers. I'm fully of the opinion that economy should not be considered at the level of safe and sustainable by design, because if it was, then it would not be innovative. So we come back to the first discussion. There wouldn't be any innovation if industry would just keep the substances as they are, just because they are well sold. I think it is very important here for industry to be innovative in the sense of finding something which is more safe and sustainable than the existing product. Thank you.
Very clear. Then I have a question here, and maybe Mark, you could start on it. And it really is a chicken and egg question. It says, right, when we're looking at safe and sustainable by design, it is very complex. But actually, when we are looking at the beginning of the value chain and we're looking at a chemical, then it's not always very clear what these criteria could and should be. Because the chemical itself may have particular concerns, perhaps, or particular properties, and that's fine. But then later on, it ends up in a product where it is very useful. So as such, when you're looking at chemicals as standalone, as such, they're not safe and sustainable by design. You really need to look at the application level as well. So how can you marry these different aspects and these different points in the value chain, if you wish?
Okay, thank you. Great. Okay, that's to me, I think, the question.
Well, I actually had asked Mars to come in first,
sorry,
and then I'll give it to you.
Sure.
Sorry, Martin. Okay, I think what we are trying to do here, I think this is one of the complex issues that we're trying to address. When we start discussing about sustainable by design approach, what we're trying to do is how do you narrow a very complex discussion that has so many elements to something that is more pragmatic and applicable. It's true that when we look at a specific substance, we might lack the visibility of what will be like the application, and then you have to have some kind of life cycle or life cycle consideration. I wouldn't say assessment, but life cycle to have some kind of overlooking what will be the end use of your materials. I think there are some very specific examples where you could narrow and you can establish a kind of dialogue between innovators and regulators. But this is exactly what we're trying to, at least to identify within the OECD. It's not, for me, it's not very clear. I think my colleagues will be able to give you more because they have been working on the issue more closely. But yes, I think that for me, it's not an issue that is very clear, and this is exactly what we're trying to identify what could be the criteria, so the main points that we should be addressing to assist in this discussion. I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Sorry, I was speaking without mic. My apologies. So Martin, you wanted to come in on this, so please go ahead. Martin, I think your mic is muted.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I don't see that particular difficulty, to be honest. I think it is quite straightforward to define what a more sustainable chemical is, and a more safe and sustainable chemical is than another one. Of course, I said we need a metrics, and that is to be developed and to be found consensus on this. But if there is, I think this is quite clear. The other question is whether that chemical or when that chemical is used, is it used in a sustainable way by the production sector? But that is that is the same question as we already have with the safety. There is safety information in the safety data sheet. Whether the production sector looks at that and follows it is not ensured just because there is a safety data sheet. And so I think it is with sustainable. But we can certainly say one thing. If a producer of whatever product for consumption wants to be sustainable and wants to make a sustainable product, he won't be able to do so if he doesn't get a sustainable chemical. And for that reason, I'm focusing on chemicals and mixtures coming to the market. Thank you.
Baron, your microphone is off.
Sorry. Thank you, Alexandra. So I was actually asking Xenia or Ronald if they wanted to come in on this. If not, that's fine. Then we move to the next question. Okay, we move to the next question. So, what, in your view, would be the key barriers in moving to production and use of chemicals which are safer and more sustainable by design? Xenia.
Thank you. So first of all, I really want to support what Ronald said, that this is a mindset. It's a shift of mindset. And I think, though, that there are some and front-running businesses that have that mindset, I think across industry, it's not really there yet. So I think first we need to work with that mindset, and also in the education of the scientists and the product designers, and we take a different approach where we think about a more holistic approach to how we use resources, how we make products, and how we make them work for people and for our health and for the planet. So I think that's number one. Then, so the mindset and the education, but I think also that this element of lock-in by industry could also be a barrier. And this is where I think we really need to get started with the sustainable finance, to say in the long term, this is where we want you to go, so we can start seeing a shift in the production equipment. Because right now the chemical industry is and the production industry is very, let's say, it's a very intricate system and very interconnected. So I think that part is also really one of the challenges. And the final part is, of course, the global market here. And I think I agree with Frida that Europe can have a lead role there, but I think Europe at the same time needs also to acknowledge that, if companies put products on the market that are safe and sustainable by design, there should be a level playing field with what is imported. And this is why I think these compliance methods that to demonstrate compliance are so important, because then we can test, the product that claims safe and sustainable by design, is it really, or is it at a substandard? So I think that level playing field is really also important. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can come in, Barend?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes, I of course agree, Kenya, but I would like to bring forward a slightly different aspect. I think at the moment there are indeed some firms who are trying to do something very akin to safe and sustainable by design, and they are to be merited for that. But the whole approach, the whole methodology is still not very developed. So actually these, in general, large companies, they are experimenting. They're trying to mass good examples and learning material about how to do this. So this at the moment is, I think, an important barrier to get there. So we have to make sure that we enable that more as governments, so including the Commission. I think that from experience, we need to go to a level of sort of automation. So it needs to be in the system that you design safe and sustainable. and that means that you have to educate people in doing it. I mean, if you have a chemical technologist now in its training, it doesn't know anything about toxicology, but does make chemicals. So if you want to understand the toxicology of what you're making, you have to have some basic knowledge about that in training, and you also have to make sure that you know enough about material science, you know enough about the market to be able to assess when do we need experts from the outside, who do we need to involve in making this a success. So I think that is an important barrier at the moment.
Baran, I don't know if...
Sorry, who's speaking?
It's Mar.
Mar, please
Yeah,
come in.
I'm sorry because I have the mic cutting, so I get half of the talks. But from what I got from Jenny and Ronald, I think I agree. I think something that I would perhaps add to that for me from the industrial chemicals approach that are existing, one of the big challenges really like a change of, it's a pragmatic change. I mean, we have to change the whole paradigm about how we will approach some of the new substances. We have something in place that works very well. I mean, REACH works very well. It has been functioning for a long time now. But, how do you address some chemicals, for example, or substances that will be addressing or will be cutting from several jurisdictions, several legislations? How do you change the mindset, the way of working? I mean, right now the regulator is at the receiving end, and they should be, for example, be moving to more like at the initial stage of the discussion where you're starting to develop a material. And this is, I think, is the change of mindset, as Ronald mentioned here, that is perhaps the more challenging. I think there's willingness. I think this workshop shows it, and I think the amount of effort that have been done in the past has proved this. But now we really need to help and to move forward to help also industry to be able to apply what we are requesting from them. So this, I think, just to add to what Xenia and Ronald mentioned.
Thank you, Mar.
Yeah.
Now, sorry, Martin.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just also a word on the educational issue. I was from the beginning when I started the green chemistry development, and of course I was very inspired by the 12 principles developed by the two American chemists. And they keep saying and advocating that education of students at the very low level or even further at high school level is already very, very important to have a mind of chemists that finally go to industry and do their specific work there of the ultimate objective that they actually should follow. And so so we also in Austria think that in our platform that the education sector is very, very important. We have even primary school education. We're talking about projects and so on just keeping in mind on what means sustainability in the context of chemicals that are used from day to day. Then a second point I wanted to make, I've seen in the chat that someone said the chemical industry is much further than the regulator on the sustainability issue, and I agree with this. I think there are many companies who have already quite advanced in the direction of sustainability. But the problem is we have not much transparency on it, and we have also not anything that is harmonized at European level. And I think now we need this, and therefore I suggest to do it quite quickly, as the Commission did. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think this panel is really incredible because you already answered my question I was going to ask before I could. I had a question on skills required, but you You dwelt on this already extensively. I'd like to pick up on the last remark that Martin was making. And it's going to be the last question to the panel as well. If you would have it your way, what sort of regulatory framework and support mechanisms would you envisage to ensure a level playing field and to promote front-running businesses? Who would like to have the first go on this?
Yeah, for me, it's easy because it was the subject of my talk. In fact, I do see the instrument of REACH as having the capacity of implementing not all, but many elements of a safe and sustainable by design policy. And I'm advocating this since I'm working in this field. But what we need to have, and that is certainly a difficult thing, is to have a good and constructive link to the many other initiatives that are there, be it the bioeconomy strategy, be it the circular economy strategy, and of course, not least but not last, the research area. Clearly, we have to have a very, very strong, I think, linkage, and therefore I'm very happy that you're taking this up to this degree of specificity and detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Mark, would you like to come in on this?
Mark, would you like to come in on this? Barend?
Yes.
Yes. It's Ronald.
Hi, Ronald. Okay. First,
Ronald. Yeah. Okay. First.
go ahead.
Go ahead. Yes. What I'd like to say is that we, of course, need the current substances regulations. They set targets for the products that are being made, the services, the substances, etc. They need to be kept there, and they need to be developed as the chemicals strategy outlines. I think that's very important. What is also very important is that this is going to be a big effort for the chemical sector in particular, but for many other sectors as well who are downstream users of chemicals, or who have to make the alternatives for where you replace hazardous chemicals. As you are all aware, that for an individual company, investment in that sort of thing is a tricky business. It's difficult to return. So you actually have to do that on a sector level, and of course, government is important to get that sort of investment going and take part in that sort of investment. So I think the connection between the European funds and national funds, particularly for education and innovation, with actually all the parts of the European Green Deal, is a big issue that needs to be well organized. So that's one thing I thought would be good to say here. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Well, Mar, would you like to come in?
Yep.
Mar, if you're speaking, I cannot hear you. Okay, let's then, for the time being, move over to Ksenia.
Thank you, Barend. So I think I will take it back to the kind of a higher level in a way, and say that I think regulations should really focus at reducing, the harm. And the harm doesn't really care like what the source of the chemical pollution was, who emitted it, or when. It cares about the total amount, and that means that what we have to, what I would like to see from regulations is that we across the policies have a harmonized approach to avoiding chemicals of concern, but we also have a focus on the volume. So talking about resources, I mean, we know in the circular economy we want to reduce the resource use, but I think we also need to think about that for chemicals. So really trying to think about how can we make the most out of the least, and make sure that if we have chemicals that they themselves or the degradation products can mineralize in the environment, so we can keep making new things over time as we need it, that we don't kind of keep losing chemicals out of the whole cycle. And I think really I would like the regulations also to have in place are the incentives that really fosters that thinking. So both the financial support mechanisms, investments, public procurement, to guide that, and to create this innovation space where you could have this production of services that with the least use of resources, make them the least complex and make sure they can mineralize and to be reused again.
Okay, very well. Thank you so much. I'm receiving a message from Mark that there may be mic issues. I try just to be sure. Mark, can you come in or not? Apparently not. I'm really sorry for that. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the conclusion of this panel. Will you please unmute and join me in a round of applause for this wonderful speaker and panelists? And not only are we coming now to the end of this panel, we are almost coming to the end of the workshop, but bear with us for a few more minutes, because we will be hearing about what are going to be the next steps. I already want to thank you for your massive and active participation in this workshop. From our perspective, it's really beyond expectation to see the level of interest and the quality of the interest as well. So it's really extremely encouraging for us that you will be accompanying us on this journey, indeed to come up with the pathway to a safe and sustainable future. So that's really great. So it's now my pleasure to introduce you, Jürgen Tietje, who is a head of unit in DG Research and Innovation. You may be aware that DG Research and Innovation is going through a reorganization process as we are speaking, and the new organization chart will become effective on the 1st of April. There will be a unit which is called Industrial Transformation, which is will be headed by Jürgen Tietje, and it's also this unit that will carry the file forward on behalf of DG Research and Innovation, so within the European Commission. So it is my pleasure to introduce Jürgen, who has a long-standing experience in industrial research, innovation, and environment, as we all know. Jürgen, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I can't say good afternoon. I'm just impressed, and that's actually my first compliment to all of you. What an exciting workshop. I was looking actually the numbers. We started at 550 and we are still 450 as the people are not hungry. I think this has been an extremely rich debate, and my compliments and my thanks go to all the speakers, but also to the audience, because I think if I look in the chat box, it's really rich. 3 concluding remarks from my side. The first one is, Barend, you already mentioned it. I have to step in here into big shoes from your side. And Peter Drell mentioned also at the beginning criteria. This has an element of judging. This is coming from the Greek language. So I was today just a witness. So what I learned today is clearly imperfect, but I was very impressed. I was first impressed that I heard actually 2 directors from the Commission, I'm a bit direct now, who not only say we want to cooperate here on the world of better regulation on research and innovation, but you heard the word bingo. I think I found it quite amazing, and you rarely hear it. You see really that the Commission is here joined up and wants to work with all of you. We witnessed then here, I think, a very rich panel looking at what stakeholders see, how they see the debate should be scoped. And I was amazed it was not a debate about why we need to do some changes or should we do some changes. It's about what should we do. I was really impressed. We heard a proposal from the industry focusing on chemicals and the value chain driven approach, highlighting the digital dimension. We should not forget about it, and also that we need a community building. We heard speakers asking for a broader thinking going beyond chemicals. We heard a new voice saying, should we really go for a life cycle approach or think more about the building block approach, chemical, materials, product, look at it step by step. And we heard also interventions about low-hanging fruits, a reference to the park partnership. But for me, I would like to take away that no one disagrees there is a need for change. And that was quite clear from all the messages given today. I think we heard then a panel bringing in the public side, the OECD showing us there is already a global dimension and there is an international player willing to engage also onto this. We learned best practices from Austria, from the Netherlands. We heard about how much engaged the European Environment Agency is actually engaged in all this debate. And we count on all their participation also in the future. This is what I witnessed today. And Barend, you already indicated it. I was a bit struck by the fact that how rich the debate was actually after the second panel. What should we do with this element of functionality? Should the economic considerations be part of the future discussions? What about the role of innovation versus regulations? I found also the debate very rich when it came to the question about barriers. Barend, you asked the question about what are actually the key barriers? And that's actually what brings me actually to the next point is what do we need now from all of you? Because we would like to reach to a commonly agreed assessment framework. That's what we need with all of you. And that's our ambitious targets. And that's what we wanted to set out and where we wanted to get your engagement today. And I feel strongly encouraged here. The success will also depend on other factors. It is the availability of sufficient relevant and harmonized data, having educated practitioners, cooperation within the value chains. We need also to know what is sustainable by comparison to see what should be more sustainable. We need also to learn about the starting point. And there we need your help as well. At the end, we would like to have criteria leading to an official certification of safe and sustainable chemicals, materials, and products, and that could and should give industry incentives to develop such kind of products and contribute towards the sustainable, green, and also social transition we need. The Green Deal always gives a sense of urgency. I think we do not want to rush. We want to move on with all of you. So what are our next steps? Our next steps will be that we will analyze what we learned today very carefully. We will now very quickly or as quickly as possible publish the mapping study in the coming weeks. We will start with you a survey. So we'll not come with any options. We come with a survey to collect input from stakeholders. So there will be a second stakeholders workshop in autumn. And from there, we will move on to have a methodology for safe and sustainable by design criteria and definition. We will continue communicating with all of you and to see how to get involved and follow up this work. If you have any feedback and you would like to get in touch with all of us, you know the team, you have seen us. And you can continue using here the functional mailbox. Before I say now I have a bon appetit, I'm a bit derogating from the rule Barend you were imposing because it would be nice. I look at Christina, Frank, Javier, Alessia, and Barend, of course, as well. If you could switch on your cameras, that would be very nice. Frank, can you manage? Frank Delon?
am here, I can put on my camera, but I can't put on everybody's.
Oh!
Of course.
Okay, I think we should all stop with a big applause. This has been the team managing an incredible, successful workshop, and I would like to thank you all for them. So really,
So you can unmute yourself if you want.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, can we just finish with a big applause and let's move on together? Thank you. This, I'm happy to conclude this workshop. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Barend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Many thanks, Barend. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.